578. Pang Yuanji slowly walked out. Other than the dust on his body that he did not intentionally brush off, there was nothing out of the ordinary about him. Chen Pinggan exchanged glances with him. Pang Yuanji nodded and walked past Chen Pinggan towards the tavern. Pang Yuanji remembered something and said loudly, "You bet on me." "Sorry, but the money for your drinks today," Pang Yuanji smiled and said, "that has nothing to do with me. If you want to pay, pay. If you want to, pay on credit." At this point, Pang Yuanji covered his mouth. He opened his hand and shook it. It was covered in blood. At the tavern, the local sword immortal Gao Kue handed over a bowl of wine. The sword immortal of the South Swirling Continent, Yuan Qingshu, smiled but said nothing. Pang Yuanji said helplessly, "Sorry about that." Gao Kue said, "You just lost. It's fine as long as you're not dead." Yuan Qingshu nodded and said, "You're much better than Qi Shou." Pang Yuanji turned around. The group had already left. Yang Zhuo took out a core condor and transformed it into a luxurious carriage. He left the street with his friends. In the spacious carriage, Chen Pinggan sat cross-legged. Ning Yaro sat beside him. The sword immortal was connected to Chen Pinggan. It had already returned to the Ning residence. Yang Zhuo took up a lot of space. He sat opposite Chen Sanqiu, Dong Haitan, and Stack Cliff. The atmosphere was silent. Chen Pinggan asked, "Does the Ning residence have any elixirs that can regenerate flesh?" Ning Yaro nodded. Fatty Yang glanced at Chen Pinggan's arm and asked, "Doesn't it hurt at all?" All the sword cultivators in the carriage were familiar with injuries. Stack Cliff's arm had been chopped off by demons before. However, it was rare to see someone like Chen Pinggan, who did not even frown from beginning to end. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's all right. It's just that Pang Yuanji's time flying sword and the remaining sword Qi from Qi Shou's leaping pearl flying sword are a little troublesome." Ning Yaro said, "Stop talking." Chen Pinggan then closed his eyes to rest. When they arrived at the Ning mansion, Mami Bai and Nalan Yeshing were already waiting for them at the door. Seeing Chen Pinggan's appearance, even Bai Lian Shuang, a warrior who was familiar with the pain of body, felt a bit sorry for him. Nalan Yeshing only said one sentence. He would not help to remove the remaining sword Qi and sword intent from their flying swords. It would be a great benefit for young Master Chen to do it himself. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded, saying that he had such a plan. The old woman led Chen Pinggan to the Ning Mansion's medicine storehouse to get some medicine for treatment. Ning Yaro and her 4 friends were sitting in a pavilion on Dragon Slaying Cliff. Except for Dong Haitan, who was still sitting there in a daze, Fatty Yang and the other 3 were staring at each other. They had thousands of words to say, but they could not say them. Ning Yaro said slowly, "If Qi Shou was not arrogant and did not want to win in a good way, he would have used his 3 flying swords at the beginning. Especially, he would have controlled the leaping pearl sword formation to not give Chen Pinggan a chance to get close to him. With the heartstring that could stare at the opponent's soul, Chen Pinggan would have lost. When a warrior and a sword cultivator compete with each other, Qi Shou would have the advantage in terms of the length of pure Qi and the amount of Qi accumulated in the Qi residence. If it was a life and death battle, both Chen Pinggan and Pang Yuanji would have died." Ning Yaro then added, "But in the end, Chen Pinggan still won the 2 tough battles. It was not that Chen Pinggan was lucky, but that he was smarter than Qi Shou and Pang Yuanji. When it comes to timing, location, and people on the battlefield, Chen Pinggan would have won as long as his fist and sword were fast enough. However, there is a big premise here. Chen Pinggan could catch their flying swords, but the rest of you could not. Your foundation as a sword cultivator is far from Pang Yuanji and Qi Shou's. Therefore, when you fought them, it was not a fight, but a struggle. To put it bluntly, you dared to face death in the southern battlefield. When it comes to killing demons, you are not cowardly at all. Death is death. Therefore, with 10% of your cultivation, you usually have 120% sword intent. Your sword attacks are not stagnant. This is very good. Unfortunately, if one of you were to fight Pang Yuanji and Qi Shou, you would be afraid. Why? There is a saying that pure martial arts have the guts. According to this saying, your guts are too weak. Ning Yaro continued, against Qi Shou, The critical moment when the battle situation changed was the instant Qi Shou brought out his heartstrings. Chen Pinggan gave Qi Shou the illusion that Chen Ping'an's speed stopped there. Therefore, after Qi Shou took the punch, especially when the flying kite was always a hair's breadth away from hurting Chen Pinggan, he understood that even if the flying kite was a hair's breadth faster, it would still be useless. It was obvious who was walking the dog and who was walking the dog. However, Qi Shou only showed it on the surface. He looked cool when facing his opponent, but in reality, he was squandering his advantage bit by bit. Chen Pinggan was even more subtle. His moves were interlocked, all for the sake of opening the path with the first punch. The second punch is called the God's drumming stance. It is a fist technique that trades injuries for lives. It is also Chen Ping'an's best fist technique. As Ning Yarou spoke, Yang Zhuo and the rest didn't even ask anything. They just listened quietly. Ning Yarou said seriously, "Now you should be clear. From the very beginning, the battle with Qi Shou was a setup for Chen Pinggan to fight Pang Yuanji. Yang Zhuo, you've seen Chen Ping'an's mind talisman, but have you ever wondered why Chen Pinggan used the mind talisman a total of 4 times in the 2 fights on the street? Why is the difference between the power of the mind talisman when facing 2 opponents? It's simple. The same talisman in the world will have different talisman paper materials and different talisman galls with different divine intent. The logic is simple. It's something that everyone knows. Was Pang Yuanji stupid? He wasn't stupid at all. The entire Great Wall of Sword Qi knew how smart Pang Yuanji was. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been nicknamed Pang Baijia. But why did he still fall into Chen Ping'an's trap and use the mind talisman to turn the situation around and secure victory? Because in the battle between Chen Pinggan and Qi Shou, the 2 ordinary distance shrinking talismans were used on purpose for Pang Yuanji to see. The most ingenious part was that the mind talisman appeared in the first fight, but it didn't have much effect on the outcome of the battle. We're all inclined to believe what we see, so Pang Yuanji had to lower his guard. If that was all, Pang Yuanji would be more careful when competing with the mind talisman. However, Chen Pinggan had more tricks up his sleeves. He purposely let Pang Yuanji see 2 things that Chen Pinggan didn't let others see. Compared to the mind talisman, those are more important. For example, Pang Yuanji noticed that Chen Ping'an's left hand hadn't actually punched. For example, Chen Pinggan might be hiding a 4th flying sword. Yang Zhuo and Chen Sanqiu looked at each other and smiled bitterly. Hearing this, Stack Zhong's head began to hurt, especially when she tried to calm her mind and condense her qi to carefully review all the details of the battle on the main street. Only then did she realize that Chen Pinggan had spent a lot of effort and set up a lot of traps in those 2 battles. It turned out that every time he punched, he had his own desires. Stack Zhong suddenly realized something. When the 4 of them first heard that Chen Pinggan was going to stay until the next battle on the city walls, they were actually very worried. They were worried that with Chen Pinggan in their team, they wouldn't be able to increase their battle prowess. Instead, it would restrict everyone's movements. Now, it seemed that she had underestimated Chen Pinggan. Dong Huafu was fine because he didn't think too much. At this moment, he was worrying about how to deal with his sister and mother when he returned to the Dong family. Ning Yarou was silent for a moment. Looking at her 4 friends, she smiled and said, "Actually, Chen Pinggan knew from the start that Charcoal and Stack Zhong were sparring with each other. He also knew why you, Fatty Yang, provoked him. He knew that all of you were thinking for him. It was just that all of you didn't believe that he could win 3 rounds, so he couldn't say much. However, I know that in his heart, he will appreciate it. He has always been this kind of person." Ning Yarou smiled and asked, "Are you relieved? Do you feel that Chen Pinggan is actually very scary deep in your heart? If someone of the same age as you is so shrewd wants to play you to death, it seems like you will only be toyed with like a fool. Will you be cheated by him and even help him count the money?" Chen Sanqiu nodded and said, "Indeed, a little." Ning Yarou shook her head. "No need. Chen Pinggan has a bottom line with whoever he interacts with, and that is respect. If you are a sword immortal worthy of respect and an expert, Chen Pinggan will sincerely respect you. If you are a weakling with a weak cultivation base and a bad background, Chen Pinggan will still interact with you calmly. Facing Grandma Bai and Grandpa Nalan, in Chen Ping'an's eyes, the two elders' most important identities were not the former martial artists of the 10th realm, nor the sword cultivators of the immortal realm in the past, but the elders of Ning Yao's family. They were the family members who had protected Chen Ping'an as he grew up. This was the order that Chen Ping'an cared about the most. It means that even if Grandma Bai and Grandpa Nalan are just ordinary old people, Chen Ping'an will still respect and be grateful to them. To all of you, you are my life and death comrades, my best friends. Then, there is you, Yang Zhe, the only son of the Yang family. Chen Sanqiu, the eldest son of the Chen family. Stack Zhong, the good girl who owns a shop and knows how to earn money. Dong Huafu, the quiet Dong Haitan. Ning Yao said no more. Chen Ping'an came from afar. Chen Ping'an changed into a fresh green robe. It was an old robe from the Ning mansion that Memar Bai had found. Chen Ping'an hid his hands in his sleeves and walked up the Zhanlong cliff. His face was pale, but he didn't look dispirited at all. He sat beside Ning Yao and asked with a smile, "Are they talking about me?" Dong Huafu nodded and was about to speak when Ning Yao said, "Did you just say you don't talk nonsense?" Dong Huafu tactfully shut up. Chen Ping'an raised his left hand and took out two contraction talismans. One was made of yellow talisman material and the other was made of gold material. Yang's eyes widened. It was not because of the talisman, but because of Chen Ping'an's natural raising of his left arm. There was no trace of the dejected and dispirited look from before on the street. Chen Ping'an put away the two talisman and smiled honestly. "I did not use my full strength in the last punch, so the injury on my left hand was not serious." Pang Yuanji was also interesting. He purposely stayed at the bottom of the pit on the street for a while before coming out. Both of us were putting on a show. I did not want to really fight to the death with Pang Yuanji, because I am sure that Pang Yuanji also has a trump card that he did not use. So I got the upper hand. Pang Yuanji was willing to admit defeat. He is a very kind person. In the two fights, it was not that I could defeat Qi Shou and Pang Yuanji with my cultivation. I relied on the rules of the Great Wall of Sword Qi and my rough understanding of their temperaments. Together, I was able to beat them by luck. The sword immortals who were watching the fight from afar and near could see the true strength of the three of us. So Qi Shou and Pang Yuanji lost, but it was not to the extent of damaging the reputation of the Qi family and master hidden official. This was my escape route. The punch had to be fast, the landing had to be accurate, and the retraction had to be steady. It was the same if he attacked with his sword. Chen Sanqiu smiled. "There are some things that you do not need to reveal to us." Chen Ping'an shook his head. "There is nothing that cannot be said. Before the fight, no matter how much I say, you will probably think that I am boasting shamelessly and do not know the severity of the situation. I am fine with it, as I do not care about these things. But you will inevitably doubt Ning Yao's judgment, so I might as well keep my mouth shut. As for why I am willing to talk about things that should be hidden, the reason is simple. It is because you are all Ning Yao's friends. I believe in Ning Yao, so I believe in you. This might not be pleasant to hear, but it is the truth." Fatty Yang said, "It is pleasant to hear. How is it not pleasant to hear? Brother Chen, your words have warmed my heart. It's as if I've drunk wine on a cold winter day." Chen Ping'an smiled. "I really can't drink wine recently. My injuries are not light. I estimate that I will need at least 10 days to half a month to recuperate." Ning Yao squinted and said, "Look at you now, jumping around and talking so much. Do you want to fight another Marquis Gao Yi?" Chen Ping'an smiled. "Marquis Gao Yi, I am not bragging. Even if I did not walk on the street, as long as Marquis Gao Yi is willing to show his face, I can really deal with him. Because he is the easiest to deal with among the three of us. It is not a problem to fight Marquis Gao Yi. In fact, Qi Shou, Pang Yuanji, and Marquis Gao Yi. This order is the best. Regardless of face, it will allow me to win 3 rounds in a row. But I am just thinking about it. Marquis Gao Yi will not be so considerate." Fatty Yang's knees went soft. Chen Sanqiu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Dong Huafu felt that only such a man was worthy of Sister Ning. Stack Zhong was also happy for Ning Yao. Ning Yarrow stepped on Chen Pingan's foot and twisted the tip of her foot. Chen Pingan smiled. I admit defeat. I was wrong. I will shut up. Fatty Yang felt that this good brother of his was an expert. Chen Sancho smiled. All right. Let Chen Pingan recuperate well. Oh right, Chen Pingan, remember to come to my house when you have time. Dong Huafu was stubborn and said directly, don't go to my house. If you go, my sister and mother will annoy you to death. I guarantee that they will be more troublesome than you dealing with Pang Yuanji. Chen Pingan stood up and nodded with a smile. The four of them were about to leave the pavilion at the top of the mountain when Grandma Bai stood below and said with a smile, that little girl Lu Duan was outside the gate just now. She said that she wanted to learn from young Master Chen. She would only stop if she learned young Master Chen's peerless fist technique. Otherwise, she would kneel at the gate and wait for young Master Chen to agree. Looking at her attitude, she seems quite sincere. On the way here, she bought a few bags of pastries. Fortunately, Miss Dong dragged her away. However, with that little brain of Lu Duan's, our Ning residents will not be peaceful in the future. Yang Zhuo and Chen Sancho were gloating. They were familiar with that girl. She was famous for being difficult to deal with. Ning Yarrow said, drag her in and beat her up. Then she will be obedient. Chen Pingan did not speak. After Chen Sancho and the others left the Ning residence, they did not return home. Instead, they went to a familiar wine shop to drink. Only Chen Pingan and Ning Yarrow were left in the pavilion. Chen Pingan said softly, I'm fine. You can rest assured. Ning Yarrow snorted. Chen Pingan leaned against the railing and raised his head. I really like it here. Ning Yarrow stretched out 2 fingers and gently twisted Chen Pingan's right sleeve. She glanced at it. Don't try to be brave in the future. Man has 1,000 plans, but God only has one. What if? Ning Yarrow gently let go of his sleeve and said, are you sure you don't want to meet the left and right people on the city wall? Chen Pingan thought for a moment and said, let's talk about it after I meet Boss and the Sword Immortal. Besides, it's hard to say if Elder Zhuo is willing to meet me. Ning Yarrow suddenly said, this meeting with Grandpa Chen is the most dangerous Q-sword. It's easy to draw legs on a snake. This is something you really need to be careful about. Chen Pingan nodded. Ning Yarrow asked, when are we going to the Great Wall of Sword Qi? Chen Pingan smiled. There's no hurry. If we go too early, Pang Yuanji and Qi Shou, especially the elders behind them, will lose face. Ning Yarrow frowned. Why are you thinking so much? You said it yourself. This is the Great Wall of Sword Qi. There aren't so many twists and turns. If they lose face, it's their own fault. If they gain face, it's earned with your own abilities. Chen Pingan said, I'm used to it. If you think it's not good, I'll change it in the future. Except for one thing, there's nothing I can't change. That thing that I can't change, and this habit that I can change anything, is the reason why I can walk step by step until now. Ning Yarrow glanced at Chen Pingan who was sitting on her left. Chen Pingan immediately stood up and sat on Ning Yarrow's right. Ning Yarrow didn't say anything. Chen Pingan held her hand gently and closed his eyes. He didn't say anything either. 3 days later. The Great Wall of Sword Qi and the city wall had been chatting with the youngsters of the Ning residence for almost 3 days. Chen Pingan went to the Great Wall of Sword Qi alone in the night. He saw the 2 familiar thatched cottages. Chen Pingan put away the talisman boat and said with a smile, greetings, boss, Sword Immortal. Chen Qingdou stood on the city wall and nodded. He seemed to be gratified. Not coveting small gains from the world is the prerequisite for cultivators to reach greater heights. Las Ning didn't come with me. That means you want to talk business with me? Chen Pingan was hesitating about which of the 2 important matters to talk about first. Chen Qingdou said with a smile, let's talk as we walk. If you have something to say, just say it. Chen Pingan hesitated for a moment and said softly, old senior, have you seen the ending? Chen Qingdou grunted. I'm calculating the time. Chen Pingan asked again, old senior, have you never thought of bringing all the sword cultivators back to the vast world? Chen Qingdou said with a smile, of course I have. Chen Ping'an's face was pale. Chen Qingdou walked slowly and said slowly, "In the 10,000 years, I have seen some very interesting outsiders, young people. The most recent is the one with excellent sword skills. A few years ago, it was that young man Cao Ci. Before that, it was Alliance. Before that, it was the scholar Chen Chunan from the South Swirl continent. Before that, it was a scholar from the Central Divine continent. Back then, it was a high-spirited scholar, not at all down and out. Before that, there were some. In total, there were about 10 of them. Every time I see them, I am not so disappointed in the vast world. But how can it be done by relying on these young people who have long been considered outsiders? There are too many people and things that disappoint me." Chen Qingdou raised his hands and opened his palms. They were like the two ends of a scale. He said to himself, "The founder of the school of swordsmanship in the vast world once came to find me. You can say that he asked for the sword with his Tao. Young people all have lofty ambitions and are willing to speak bold and visionary words." Chen Qingdou smiled. Some of the principles that he felt were the greatest can become the foundation that will not be shaken by the ways of the world. In my opinion, they are childish. But some unintentional words are not bad. As the ways of the world move forward, their weight will become heavier and their roots will be deeper. It is just that he did not realize it at that time. That is good. Only then will there be room for growth. Chen Qingdou pointed to the wasteland in the south. There was once a demon grand ancestor who made a suggestion for me to consider. Chen Ping'an, take a guess. Chen Ping'an said, "The wasteland belongs to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The vast world belongs to the demon race." Chen Qingdou did not seem surprised that this young man had guessed the answer. He asked again, "Then why do you think I rejected it? You must know that the other party promised that the sword cultivators of the Great Wall of Sword Qi only need to make way for them. When they reach the vast world, we do not need to help them draw our swords." Chen Ping'an answered, "This is where the other party's intentions are the most sinister. In the process of making way and opening a path, the sword cultivators of the Great Wall of Sword Qi will fall apart. At this moment, there are a few sword cultivators who are hostile to the vast world. On that path, there will be even more sword cultivators who will lose confidence in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. They will choose to leave, or they will draw their swords in anger and stand against the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Perhaps the Great Wall of Sword Qi would eventually be able to occupy the entire wildlands, but it definitely wouldn't be able to defend such a vast piece of land. Thousands of years later, the unremarkable demon race that was left behind in this world would eventually rise to prominence. Sword cultivators who no longer had a reason to sacrifice themselves would gradually wear down their sword intent in their peaceful lives. In the end, the world of the wildlands is still the world of the demon folk. Senior, if you're willing to keep an eye on the world and kill every demon folk from the upper 5 realms that shows up, you'll be able to kill them with your sword. If I were the demon folk Grand Patriarch, I wouldn't even need to sign an agreement. I'd just let you attack with your sword. Even after hundreds or thousands of years, there will come a day when your mind won't be able to focus, and you'll be exhausted. You'll still have energy, but your sword attacks will become slower and slower." Chen Qingdou nodded and said, "Well said." Chen Ping'an slowly deliberated and pondered. He continued, "But this is only the reason why Sword Immortal Boss did not agree. It is because Senior is used to looking at things that happened thousands or even tens of thousands of years ago. Only by purposely distancing yourself from your family can you ensure that you are truly pure. However, other than Sword Immortal Boss, everyone has their own selfish motives. My so-called selfish motives have nothing to do with good or evil. As long as one is human, it is normal for humans to have such emotions. The ones who are guarding this place are the saints of the 3 religions. There will be survivors of Sword Immortal Sword from every major family. There will also be people who have been in contact with Inverted Hanging Mountain and Haoran World." Chen Ping'an looked around. If not for the sword cultivators of the North Continent, if not for the fact that there were so many foreigners from Haoran World who took the initiative to come here to kill the enemy, Sword Immortal Boss would not have been able to protect the hearts of the people on this city wall. Chen Qingdou nodded and said, "You are right." Chen Ping'an said, I was only thinking about some things and saying some things. But Sword Immortal Boss has done a truly magnificent feat, and he has done it for 10,000 years. Chen Qingdao smiled. You are even more eloquent than Alliance. Chen Pinggan was speechless. Chen Qingdao said, I will personally attend to the matchmaker's marriage proposal. Chen Pinggan blushed and said, Sword Immortal Boss, I have yet to make the request. Chen Qingdao turned his head and asked with a smile, embarrassed? Chen Pinggan shook his head vigorously and said, not at all. What is there to be embarrassed about? Chen Qingdao nodded. You are indeed the last disciple of that sour scholar. You have inherited all his teachings. Chen Qingdao waved his hand. Little Ning secretly followed us. I won't disturb the two of you. Chen Pinggan was silent for a moment. He stretched out his tightly wrapped right hand and solemnly cupped his fists and bowed. Chen Pinggan of Haoran World, may I be so bold as to say something on behalf of the entire Haoran world? I dare not refuse a gift from an elder. Chen Qingdao smiled and said, I am afraid of you. The old man waved his hand. In the Ning mansion, the immortal weapon Sword Immortal was still forced out of its scabbard. In the blink of an eye, as if it had broken through the restrictions of heaven and earth, it silently appeared on top of the city wall. The old man casually held it in his hand. He held the sword in one hand and 2 fingers of the other hand together. He slowly stroked it and said with a smile, Haoran Qi and Taoism always fight like this. It is not good to be unreasonable. The old man held the sword for a moment. After he withdrew his hand, the hand holding the sword gently shook and the immortal sword was thrown into the scabbard on the table in the Ning mansion. Chen Pinggan was stunned. Chen Qingdao had already turned around with his hands behind his back. He said, Go about your business. Be brave. On top of the lonely city wall, Ning Yaro and Chen Pinggan walked side by side. Ning Yaro held up the jade pendant. Under the moonlight, it shone brightly. The words peace were engraved on the front. Therefore, this was the world's most authentic peace jade pendant. She gently turned it over. On the back, 4 words were engraved, I am innocent. She held the jade pendant high and looked up. As she walked, she asked casually, What did you talk about? Chen Pinggan walked beside her and said, Boss, the immortal Sword Immortal, asked me to be brave. I don't understand what it means. Ning Yaro held the jade pendant and stopped. She gently tapped Chen Pinggan's forehead with the jade pendant and scolded, Where is the honesty of someone back then? Chen Pinggan suddenly squatted down. He turned his head and patted his back. Back then, Ning Yaro carried Chen Pinggan on her back at the immortal tomb of the heavenly deity in Liju Cave. Ning Yaro's face was full of disdain, but her ears were red. Chen Pinggan didn't get up. He smiled and said, So there are things that Ning Yaro doesn't dare to do? Finally, on top of the city wall, Chen Pinggan carried Ning Yaro on his back and walked slowly. In the night, Chen Pinggan carried the woman he loved on his back. It was like carrying all the beautiful moonlight in the world. As they walked, Ning Yaro's face suddenly turned red. She grabbed Chen Pinggan's ear and twisted it. Chen Pinggan! Chen Pinggan cried out and quickly turned his head. Ning Yaro hit the back of his head with a chestnut and said angrily, If you keep doing this, I'll really get angry. Chen Pinggan felt wronged and said, Okay. On top of the city wall, an old man with a stern face suddenly appeared. Put Ning Yaro down for me. Chen Pinggan was stunned and said angrily, Why do you care? Ning Yaro said softly, He's my grandfather. Chen Pinggan was about to put Ning Yaro down in anger. Carry her. Unexpectedly, someone in the distance spoke. The first sentence was directed at Chen Pinggan, and the next sentence was directed at the old man. Why do you care? As expected, they were the senior and junior brothers of the sage of literature. 579. After the foreign Sword Immortal spoke, the patriarch of the Yarrow clan, Yarrow Chongdao, fell into a dilemma. As expected of left and right, his words and actions could easily cause others to be in a dilemma. 100 years ago, those innate sword embryos whose sword heart had collapsed would most likely be able to empathize with Yarrow Chongdao's current situation. For example, when he first drew his sword, the South Swirl continent genius Cao Jun, whose sword heart was like a pond full of lotus flowers, ended up in a miserable state. Only a lake of withered lotuses was left. He fell from the altar, and became the laughingstock of the entire South Swirl continent. In the end, he could only quietly leave the Aquarius continent, and in this period of time, he wasted 100 years, and was still unable to break through to the unpolished Jade realm. One had to know that Cao Jun was publicly recognized as a once-in-a-century sword genius in the South Swirl continent. There were already sword immortals from other places who noticed the abnormality here. All of them smiled, and planned to watch the show. Those who liked to drink had already opened their wine jugs. They were not the sword immortals who were watching from the street. Those who were stationed on the city wall were all experienced sword immortals. Naturally, they would not shout or whistle. Of course, they were also afraid that if left and right were unhappy, they would call for a group fight. Left and right's sword techniques were too high, their sword chi was too strong, they were more unreasonable, and were least afraid of one person fighting a group. Yarrow Chongdao's expression was ugly. As the patriarch of the Yarrow clan, the anger in his heart had accumulated for many years. Just as Yarrow Chongdao was about to call for left and right to go to the south of the city wall for a fight, Chen Pingan braced himself and acted as the peacemaker, gently putting down Ning Yarrow. He called for old Mr. Yarrow, and then asked Ning Yarrow to accompany the elders, while he went to see Senior Zwe. Ning Yarrow took her grandfather for a stroll. Chen Pingan's body was like an arrow. In a flash, he went to find left and right. Without the reckless young man, and with only his granddaughter by his side, Yarrow Chongdao's expression became much better. Towards his daughter and son-in-law, the old man's emotions were complex. Sadness, regret, resentment, anger, disappointment, it was difficult to truly describe them. But towards Ning Yarrow, who was a generation away from him, the old man only felt pride and guilt. On the other side of the city wall, Chen Pingan stopped 10 steps away from a middle-aged sword immortal who had his back turned to him. He was unable to get any closer. Almost all the apertures in his body were brimming with sword chi. It was as if he was facing a greater world around him at all times. It was already not easy for ordinary sword cultivators and chi refinement warriors from the other 3 sects and 100 clans to store their vital items in their acupoints to be filled with spirit energy. They could then expand their territory slightly. Looking around, Chen Pingan cupped his fists and said, "Junior greets Senior Zwe." Left and right remained indifferent. Chen Pingan took a slight detour and leaped onto the city wall. He turned around and sat cross-legged facing the left and right. Countless sword chi crisscrossed and cut the void. This meant that the sword chi contained in every wisp of sword chi had reached the legendary realm of refinement and pureness. It could break open a small world at will. In other words, at places like the border between the Skeleton Beach and the Ghost Region Valley, left and right did not need to use his sword or even control the sword chi. He could enter a place where there was no one and the door to the small world would open automatically. Chen Pingan saw that left and right did not want to speak, but he could not just leave. That would be too impolite. Since he had nothing to do, he simply calmed down and stared at the circulation of the sword chi, hoping to find some rules. After about half an hour, Chen Pingan, whose eyes were sore, was slightly moved. However, his state of mind quickly returned to still water. Just now, he saw a wisp of sword chi that seemed to be on the verge of breaking free from the restraints of the left and right. That kind of terrifying feeling in that instant was like an immortal holding a mountain that was about to smash into the lake in Chen Pingan's heart. It made Chen Pingan very nervous. Left and right still did not open his eyes. He finally opened his mouth and said, "Is there something you need from me?" Chen Pingan asked, "Old Mr. Wensheng, where is he now? If I have the chance to go to the Central Divine Continent in the future, how should I find him?" Left and right's expression softened. He said indifferently, "Mr. Wen has already left Sui Mountain to open up an ancient place that the Confucian sages have been unable to break through for a long time. There is a senior from the Central Divine Continent who is holding a sword to open the way. Mr. Wen is in charge of consolidating the path. Both are indispensable." Chen Pingan nodded. "Thank you, Senior Left, for clearing my doubts." Left and Right asked, "How's your study going?" Chen Pingan answered, "When it comes to studying, I have never slacked off. My heart has never stopped. Left and right said, the results are not very good. Chen Pinggan said, studying is a long-term thing. It is fast and abundant. My aptitude is not good enough and inevitably superficial. It is better to go slow and right and seek a profound understanding. Left and right were silent. On the opposite wall, Yarrow Chongdao was somewhat jealous. He said helplessly, there is nothing to see over there. They are separated by so many realms. They can't fight. Ning Yarrow wanted to say something but stopped. Few people on the Great Wall of Sword Chi knew about the relationship between Chen Pinggan and Left and Right. Ning Yarrow did not even mention it to Grandma Bai and Grandpa Nalen. This was the most interesting part. If Chen Pinggan did not have any connection with Left and Right, with Left and Right's temper, he might not even bother to open his eyes, let alone speak up for Chen Pinggan. Therefore, Yarrow Chongdao was actually confused at this moment. He did not understand why Left and Right, this eccentric sword cultivator who had nothing to do with the sword, would fight with him for an outsider. Wasn't Left and Right meddling too much in the family affairs of the Yarrow and Ning families? Therefore, if it were not for that brat surnamed Chen who mediated between them, Yarrow Chongdao would have personally experienced whether Left and Right swordsmanship was really that high in the vast battlefield to the south of the city wall. As for winning or losing, it was not important. He would lose anyway. Although Yarrow Chongdao was a great sword immortal in the immortal realm, he was past his prime and had no hope of breaking through the realm. For hundreds of years, he had been in constant wars and accumulated more and more disadvantages. Yarrow Chongdao himself admitted that he was becoming more and more unworthy of the title of Great Sword Immortal. Every time Yarrow Chongdao saw those young Earth Immortal children of different surnames, each of them full of vigor and vitality, he felt both gratified and sad at the same time. Only when he looked at his granddaughter from afar, who was the well-deserved leader of those young geniuses and was nicknamed Sour Face by Alliance, would he smile. Once, someone was drunk and said that when he saw old Yarrow's sour face, which seemed to be engraved with the words "pay up if you owe money," he would have a conscience and remember the money for those years of wine on credit. After that, all the restaurants and taverns under the name of the Yarrow family never sold half a pot of wine to that guy again. He did not need to pay back the money for the wine he owed. Yarrow Chongdao asked casually, it seems that the two of them knew each other before? Ning Yarrow could only say one thing. When Chen Pinggan came to the Great Wall of Sword Chi for the first time, the cross-continent ferry was obstructed at the Jiaolong Gully. It was Left and Right who opened the way with his sword. Sword Chi Great Wall of Sword Chi had heard of this matter, but most of the information was incomplete. Firstly, Inverted Hanging Mountain kept it a secret. After the incident at the Jiaolong Gully, Left and Right had a hearty fight with the Great Heavenly Lord, the second direct disciple of Taoist elder of Inverted Hanging Mountain. Secondly, Left and Right never seemed to need a reason to open the way with his sword. The old man and Ning Yarrow did not meet much and chatted even less. Therefore, compared to Left and Right and Chen Pinggan, he was not much better. Chen Pinggan said, Senior Left killed the Jiaolong at the place where the Jiaolong gathered and saved my life. I have always remembered it in my heart. Left and Right said indifferently, it has nothing to do with you. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, I know that Senior Left does not see me as a junior. Left and Right said, don't think too much about it. Those who can enter my eyes can be counted with one's fingers. Chen Pinggan said again, I also don't think that I should acknowledge Senior Left as my senior apprentice brother. Left and Right smiled and opened his eyes, but he looked into the distance. Oh! Chen Pinggan's expression was calm. He shifted and sat cross-legged facing the distance. It's not that I was young and ignorant. Now that I'm young and rash, I'm just speaking from the bottom of my heart. Left and Right still didn't get angry. Instead, he said something that was thousands of miles away from the topic. In life, other than determining whether the world is as big as the sky, high, and vast or as small as a mustard seed, the most important thing is to prove the truth of oneself. Chen Pinggan said slowly, then I'll say a few more words from the bottom of my heart. It might be unreasonable, but I can't not say it. Senior Left's life was full of learning and practicing the sword. In the end, he accumulated a lot of experience and had many ups and downs. First, he made countless Xiantian sword embryos bow their heads. Then, he went out to the sea to visit the immortals. Then, he went to the North Continent alone with his sword. Finally, he went to the Tongi continent and killed Dumaro to stop him from ascending. After doing so many things, why didn't he go to the Aquarius continent to take a look? What Mr. Chi thinks is Mr. Chi's problem. What eldest senior brother should do is what a eldest senior brother should do. Left and right were silent. Chen Pingan stood up. This is the only thing I wanted to say when I came to the Great Wall of Sword Chi. I heard that senior left is here. Chen Pingan was about to leave. Left and right said, don't stand so high up when talking to senior. Chen Pingan could only swallow the words of farewell back into his stomach and obediently return to his seat. In truth, Chen Pingan was already prepared to be beaten up. At most, he would just lie down in the Ning residence for a month. Both of them were speechless. Chen Pingan asked, Senior Left, do you have something to say? Left and Right shook his head, I'm too lazy to reason with you. This is not something I'm good at. So I'm hesitating on the strength of my sword. Your cultivation is too low, and this is troublesome. Chen Pingan did not think that Left and Right was joking, so he said, Mr. Wensheng, you love to drink and travel. Have you never been to the Great Wall of Sword Chi? The wine here is actually not bad. Left and Right seemed to be sullen for the first time. Scram. Since the senior has spoken, the junior will follow. Chen Pingan immediately stood up and called out to Ning Yarrow. He took out the talisman boat and stopped outside the city. Yarrow Chongdao nodded to Ning Yarrow. Ning Yarrow rode the wind to the talisman boat, and together with Chen Pingan, who was pretending to be calm, they returned to the city that was still lit up in the night. Left and Right glanced at the green-robed young man on the talisman boat, especially the familiar white jade hairpin. Left and Right closed his eyes again, and continued to sharpen his sword intent. Complain to Mr. Every complaint was correct, and he could still be in the right. This kind of thing, when everyone was still young, who was the best at it among the fellow disciples? Yarrow Chongdao came to Left and Right, and looked at the small talisman boat in the city, and asked, Left and Right, do you think highly of this young man? Left and Right said indifferently, my impression of the Yarrow family is very ordinary. So don't talk nonsense with me just because you're older. Yarrow Chongdao was almost furious. Did he really think that he was a clay bodhisattva with no temper? Let's fight, I'm not afraid of you. Left and Right, can you really beat me to death? In the end, the eldest sword immortal walked out of the cottage with a smile, and stood at the door. He looked up and said softly, what a rare guest. Chen Qingdou quickly walked back to the cottage. Since the visitor was a guest and not an enemy, there was no need to worry. Chen Qingdou just stamped his foot, and immediately set up a restriction. The entire Great Wall of Sword Chi was isolated into a small world, so as to avoid unnecessary spying. Apart from Chen Qingdou, who was the first to notice the traces, the other sages and the hidden official also realized that something was wrong. No one could silently pass through the sky canopy restriction of the two worlds and come to the Great Wall of Sword Chi without going through the inverted mountain gate. Not only the Daoist Great Heavenly Lord guarding the inverted mountain couldn't do it. Perhaps even the accompanying sages in the vast world who were in charge of guarding the territory of a continent couldn't do it with the jade token in their hands. Many sword immortals guarding the city wall didn't realize that someone had sneaked in, let alone those outside the Great Wall of Sword Chi. It would be extremely difficult to find out when a strange phenomenon appeared on the city wall. Moreover, no one dared to act rashly. Many sword immortals continued to cultivate. Left and Right was stunned for a moment, and then wanted to stand up. In the end, he was slapped on the head. How can you talk to your senior like this? Where are the rules? Left and Right hesitated for a moment, and still wanted to stand up. Since Mr. was here, he had to stand up and bow. In the end, he was slapped on the head again. You still don't want to listen, right? You want to talk back, right? If I don't teach you a lesson for 3 days, you'll become a troublemaker, right? Left and Right could only stand there without really sitting down. He said to Yarrow Chongdao, this junior has been rude. I apologize to Senior Yarrow. Then, Yarrow Chongdao saw a shabby old man who looked like a Confucian scholar. He stretched out his hands to help his uneasy left and right while grinning at him. Family head Yarrow, your great sword immortal Yarrow, right? I've heard so much about you. You gave birth to a good daughter and helped me find a good son-in-law. Great sword immortal Yarrow, you're really lucky. I can't help but be envious of you. You've only taught a few disciples, which are just passable. Left and right could finally stand and talk. He took a step back and bowed. Mr. The shocking sword chi around him had no effect on the old Confucian in a green robe whose figure was faintly discernible. Yarrow Chongdao's face was full of disbelief. He asked tentatively, Mr. Wensheng? The old scholar looked embarrassed. What Wensheng? It's long gone. I'm still young, so I don't deserve to be called Mr. It's just that I'm lucky to have a little bit of my past glory. Let's not talk about it now. I'm not as old as family head Yarrow, so just call me little brother. Yarrow Chongdao was a little stunned. He didn't know how to deal with this famous scholar of the Confucian school of literature. The Great Wall of Sword Chi sword cultivators just happened to be the most disdainful. The old scholar looked around and said anxiously, I came in a hurry and have to leave. I can't stay for long. Big sword immortal, let's have a chat. Chen Qingju sat in the thatched hut and nodded with a smile. Then let's have a chat. A scholarly sage in charge of the Great Wall of Sword Chi took the initiative to appear and bowed. Greetings, Wensheng. The sages of the three sects would take turns to guard this place. The length of time was indefinite. This scholarly sage used to be a famous Buddha. After he came to the Great Wall of Sword Chi, he learned the divine powers of two sects. His spells were extremely powerful, and he was an existence that even the reclusive official didn't want to provoke. The old scholar sighed. You just lost in an argument. It's because your knowledge isn't deep enough. It's not like you Buddhists aren't good enough. I advised you not to do that back then. Why did you have to join us Confucians? Look at you now. Do you really think that you can handle the fundamental knowledge of two sects? If there's such a simple thing, why bother fighting? Isn't it because the Daoist ancestors and Buddhist ancestors aren't that good at persuading people to fight? Besides, you're only bad at arguing, but you're good at fighting. What a pity. What a pity. When these words fell into the ears of the Confucian disciples of the Confucian temple, they might be considered disgraceful and rebellious. At the very least, they were siding with outsiders. The scholarly sage who changed sects after losing the debate smiled and said, Immeasurable time is the place of freedom. His words caused the sky and earth of the Great Wall of Sword Chi to change color. However, it was quickly dispersed by the sword chi. The old scholar shook his head and sighed. In a flash, he came to the cottage. Chen Qingdao extended his hand and said with a smile, Sage of literature, please take a seat. The old scholar calmed down. The Confucian temple needs to borrow 3 people from you. Chen Qingdao asked, Why are you here? Why aren't you the more legitimate sage of rites or the vice-hierarch of the Confucian temple in Middle-earth? The old scholar chuckled. I'm thick-skinned. Even if they come, they'll be covered in dirt. Chen Qingdao shook his head. No. The old scholar muttered, That's not good. The left and right arrived outside the cottage. Not long after, the old scholar walked out of the cottage with a melancholic look. It's hard to talk to him. But no matter how hard it is, we still have to talk. The left and right asked, When will you leave this place? The old scholar scratched his head. I have to try again. If there's really no room for discussion, there's nothing I can do. I'll still have to leave. There's nothing I can do. I'm destined to be a scapegoat for the rest of my life. The left and right said, Don't you want to see Chen Pinggan? The old scholar said angrily, Why do you care? The left and right said nothing. No wonder he was the founder of the Sage of Literature. The old scholar seemed to have a guilty conscience. He patted the left and right shoulder. The left and right, the teacher and the scholar you respect have finally opened a path together. It's a vast territory comparable to the fifth world. There are many things, but not many people. In the future, there won't be many people. Isn't that what you want? Don't you want to go there and take a look? The left and right shook his head. Teacher, there aren't many people here either. It's even better than the fifth world because there are fewer people here. They won't swarm in. The old scholar complained, I feel wronged as a teacher. My students and disciples don't listen to me. The left and right said softly, no, there's still Chen Pingan. The old scholar said earnestly, left and right, if you continue to poke at the teacher's heart, it won't be right. The left and right were puzzled. Why is it not suitable for the teacher to meet Chen Pingan? The old scholar smiled and frowned at the same time. He had a strange expression. I heard that your junior brother has just built a hall of patriarchs in his hometown. He has my statue in the middle and the highest position. It's actually not suitable. He can just secretly hang it in his study. I'm not someone who cares about such trivial matters. You see, when the Confucian temple kicked me out, did I care? I didn't care at all. There's no reason for fame and gain in this world. It's like salted peanuts that go with wine. The left and right said, I'll have to trouble the teacher to wipe the smile off your face. The old scholar replied with an O. Realizing that old Yarrow was no longer on the city wall, he rubbed his face and jumped up. With a backhanded slap, he hit the left and right side of his head. You still have the nerve to talk about other people's nonsense. Aren't you full of nonsense yourself? Among the disciples, you're the least enlightened. The left and right side said helplessly, after all, he's an elder in Ning Yarrow's family. I can't help but be restrained. Puzzled, the old scholar said, I didn't say that your hands and feet were tied. You can't even move your hands and feet, but you have so much sword chi. Sometimes, if you're not careful, you won't be able to control it and run towards Old Man Yarrow. Old Man Yarrow will shout a few words and then the two of you will spar and learn from each other's swordsmanship. If you win against Old Man Yarrow, you can open your throat and flatter him. Can't you understand? The left and right side nodded. I'm stupid. Teacher, you're right. The old scholar turned and ran to the hut. Think of something. Then I'll go and negotiate. The left and right side of the city wall. After a while, the old scholar sighed again and returned to the left and right side. The left and right side asked, Teacher, do you think we're standing on a speck of dust and walking to another speck of dust? That's the limit of a cultivator. The old scholar smiled and said, a tree greets another tree in the wind. A mountain greets another mountain in silence for thousands of years. A river greets another river. When they grow up, they will collide with each other. All living things are silent and content. The left and right side pondered for a while. I implore you to speak more simply. The old scholar said, I don't know the answer to your question. I can only fool you. The left and right side had nothing to say. The old scholar sighed. Immortals sit on the peak of the mountain, scribbling their own paths. The left and right side said, Teacher, you're reprimanding your student. The old scholar shook his head and said in a low voice, I'm asking for a sage and a hero. The left and right side accompanied his teacher and watched the scenery for the whole night. They didn't say anything else. When the sun rose, the old scholar turned and walked to the hut. If I can't convince Chen Qingdou this time, I'm going to make a scene. The left and right side quietly waited for the result. At noon, the old scholar left the hut. He stroked his beard and didn't say anything. The left and right side whispered, Chen Pingan wants to propose marriage to the Ning family. The eldest sword immortal agreed to be the matchmaker. The old scholar was stunned. He beat his chest and stamped his feet. Chen Qingdou, that old thing, shameless. What does it have to do with him? Does he think I'm dead? Fine, let's just say I'm half dead. There was a bang. The old scholar's already faintly discernible figure turned into a shadow and disappeared without a trace. It was as if he had suddenly disappeared from this world. The left and right side squinted, holding the sword hilt and facing the hut. But in an instant, there was a slight ripple. The old scholar stood still, looking travel-worn and exhausted. He stretched out a hand and patted the arm holding the sword. The left and right side still didn't let go of the sword hilt. The old scholar smiled. Fine, it's not a big deal. Chen Qingdou appeared at the door of the hut and asked with a smile, You're not going to leave? The old scholar sighed. Even if I wanted to stay for a long time, I can't do it. After drinking the wine, I'll immediately pack up and leave. This was the pressure of heaven and earth. When Lu Chen went from the Qingming world to the Haoran world and then to the Lizhu Grotto heaven, it wasn't easy either. Chen Qingdou reminded him with a smile, "We don't have Mr. Wansheng's belongings here. I advise you not to do this kind of shady business." The old scholar suddenly understood. That's right, that's fine too. The Great Wall of Sword aura that didn't fight was actually very peaceful. There were also streams of horses and carriages outside the noble houses and the barking of chickens and dogs in the small alleys. It was just that there were no civil and military temples or city god pavilions. There was no custom of putting up door gods or spring couplets. There was also no custom of worshipping ancestors. The ruined street was being renovated. The craftsmen were busy. The biggest culprit was sitting on a bench in front of a grocery store, basking in the sun. Ning Yarrow was chatting with Fan Zhong. Business was quiet and ordinary. Chen Pinggan saw that Fan Zhong didn't seem to be in a hurry. He was a little anxious. However, they had only met a few times. Chen Pinggan didn't want to speak so easily. He had to be careful when it came to the woman he loved. A big kid came closer and rubbed his nose with his fist. He mustered up his courage and asked, "You're Chen Pinggan, right?" Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "What? Looking for a fight?" The kid was so scared that he took a few steps back. He was still unwilling to leave and asked, "Do you teach me fist techniques? I can pay you." Chen Pinggan shook his head. "No." The kid insisted, "If you think the money is too little, I can owe you. After I learn fist techniques and kill demons, I can pay you back time and time again. Anyway, you're so capable and your fist is so big. I don't dare to owe you money." Chen Pinggan folded his hands in his sleeves. Languid, he asked, "What's the point of learning fist techniques? Shouldn't you practice sword techniques?" The kid was annoyed. "I'm not an innate sword embryo. There's no point in practicing sword techniques. No one is willing to teach me. Even Sister Fan Zhong thinks I'm not talented enough and wants me to be a bricklayer. I've been looking after her shop for a few months for nothing." Chen Pinggan smiled. Practicing martial arts and fist techniques is similar to practicing sword techniques. They both cost a lot of money. It's also about talent. You'd better be a bricklayer. The kid squatted on the spot. Perhaps he had already guessed that this would be the result. He sized up the young man in green who was said to be from the vast world. "Since you're speaking so harshly, don't be impolite." So he said, "You don't look that good. Why would Sister Ning like you?" Chen Pinggan was a little amused. He asked, "If you like someone, you only look at their appearance." The kid asked back, "What else?" Chen Pinggan smiled. "I'm not ugly." The kid squatted there, shook his head, and sighed. Chen Pinggan was a little hurt. He was not as handsome as Chen Sanqiu and Pang Yuanji, but he was not ugly. He raised his hand and used it to touch the stubble on his chin. It was probably because he had not shaved. With this bold kid taking the lead, a large group of people of the same age gathered around. There were also some youths and some girls further away. Everyone's eyes were filled with curiosity as they looked at the foreigner who had fought 4 rounds in a row. The vast world was in spring. Here at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, it was autumn. Separated by a door, it was a different world. Different seasons had different customs. It was not difficult to survive at the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Even the weakest kid could do it. However, if he wanted to live well here, it would become extremely difficult. Therefore, those who could drink often, even on credit, were not ordinary people. Of course, the descendants of the major clans did not have to worry about food or clothing. It was also very simple to live a life of luxury. Their ancestors had accumulated good karma. They were all sword immortals and sword cultivators who had exchanged their lives for a life of luxury. Moreover, they had to go to war. If they could walk down from the top of the city alive, they deserved to live a good life. Perhaps they felt that Chen Pinggan was easier to talk to. Soon, Chen Pinggan's stool was surrounded by a large group of people. They chattered and bustled. Those who could enter the city from the inverted mountain usually stayed with the major clans. They did not like to come here. This was the first time Chen Pinggan had come to the Great Wall of Sword Qi, and he had chatted with Ning Yarrow about many things in the city. He knew that the young people who were born and raised here had different attitudes towards the vast world that was just a stone's throw away. Some said that they had to go there and eat a bowl of the most authentic young chun noodles. Some said that there were many good-looking girls in the vast world. They were really just girls. They were weak and had willowy waists. They swayed left and right. In any case, they did not have a single strand of sword chi on them. They also wanted to know what kind of life the scholars there were living. At this moment, there were many questions around Chen Pingan. Chen Pingan answered some of them and pretended not to hear some of them. There was a child who had never been to the south side of the city in his life. He said, "Are there really countless green mountains in your hometown? They are especially green, especially after the rain. When you take a deep breath, you can smell the fragrance of flowers and plants." A slightly older youth asked Chen Pingan about the mountain gods and water immortals getting married. Lord Xingwang solved cases at night. What were the mountain spirits and water ghosts like? There were also people who hurriedly took out wrinkled but treasured picture books. They asked if the pictures in the books were real. They asked if the mandarin ducks were hiding under the lotus flowers to avoid the rain. They asked if the big houses over there were really nets under the eaves to stop the birds from using them as nests to poop. They also asked if the courtyard of the Four Waters Gathering Hall would really not freeze people in the middle of winter when it rained and snowed. Also, the wine over there was like a pebble on the side of the road. Could one drink it without paying? Wasn't it unreasonable that they had to pay for their drinks here? Also, what kind of place was that brothel filled with women? What kind of wine was the flower wine? What was the matter with the planting of seedlings over there? Why did the people over there have to have a place to stay after they died? Were they not afraid that the living would not have a place to stay? Was the vast world really that big? Finally, a youth grumbled, "You don't know much. You answered 3 questions and 1 answer. To think that you are a member of the vast world." Chen Pingan quietly twisted his wrist and took out the sword-nurturing pot. He drank a mouthful of wine and waved his hand, "Disperse, disperse. Don't disturb your sister Stack Zhong's business." The kid who first spoke to Chen Pingan squatted beside the small stool and said, "The shop doesn't have much business. Let's talk some more." Chen Pingan laughed, "I chatted with you for half a day, but I didn't earn a single copper coin." Complaints rose everywhere and the birds and beasts scattered. The kid ran far away, then turned around and shouted, "Sister Ning, this guy is stingy and stingy. Why do you like him?" Chen Pingan pretended to get up. The kid turned into the corner of the street and stuck his head out. He shouted even louder, "Sister Ning, I'm really not lying to you. Just now, Chen Pingan secretly told me that he thinks Sister Stack Zhong looks good. Sigh. Don't like this kind of playboy." Ning Yarrow was inside the shop, leaning against the counter. She smiled at Stack Zhong. Chen Pingan sat back on the stool and raised his middle finger toward the street. After the hustle and bustle, the sun was warm and quiet. Chen Pingan drank wine, still not used to it. Chen Pingan suddenly stood up. It turned out that an old scholar was standing beside him. The old scholar patted the young man's shoulder. "You've grown up. It's been hard on you." 580. There weren't many scholars in the Great Wall of Sword Chi. There weren't any schools here, so there weren't any teachers. For people like Stack Zhong, the children in the shabby alleyways could only learn to read by relying on the large and small slanted stone tablets that were randomly placed in the corners of the streets and alleyways. They could only learn a few words every day. After a long time, if they really put their heart into learning, they could also flip through books and read books. As for more knowledge, they wouldn't be able to learn anything more. Although Ning Yarrow had never seen the sage of literature, she could vaguely guess the identity of the old man. She did not feel much about it. The only thing she felt was that when she was traveling around the world, she had seen some portraits of the sage of literature in books that had not been completely banned. Those books were mostly the same. Whether it was a half-length portrait or a portrait, the sage of literature was portrayed in a dignified manner. Looking at it now, it was actually a thin old man. Stack Zhong was a little puzzled. Ning Yarrow said, "Let's talk about our own business. Don't worry about them. Outside, it was an unexpected reunion after a long separation. Chen Pinggan smiled and did not say anything. The old scholar turned his head to look at the two girls in the shop and asked softly, "Which one?" Chen Pinggan whispered, "The prettier one." The old scholar was very pleased. He clenched his fist in front of his chest and gave a thumbs up. Chen Pinggan asked the old man to wait for a moment. He went inside to inform Stack Jong and took a chair out. Stack Jong said that there were no dishes in the shop, so he asked Ning Yarrow if she could help him buy some. Ning Yarrow nodded and quickly went to the nearby wine shop to get a meal box. There were a few dishes, cups, and bowls. Chen Pinggan and the old man were already sitting on a small stool, using the chair as a table. It looked a little funny. Chen Pinggan stood up and wanted to take the meal box and open it himself. However, he was glared at by Ning Yarrow. She arranged the dishes, placed the wine bowls, and put the meal box aside. Then she said to the old scholar to invite the sage of literature to drink slowly. The old elementary scholar had already stood up and was standing next to Chen Pinggan. He was grinning from ear to ear. This was the so-called blooming of flowers. Ning Yarrow called Stack Jong to leave the shop and go for a walk together. The old elementary scholar slurped down his wine and took a deep breath. "I've worked myself to death, but I've finally returned to being an immortal." Chen Pinggan drank slowly and smiled at the old man who didn't seem to have changed much. The old scholar picked up some food with his chopsticks and saw that Chen Pinggan did not move. He raised the chopsticks in his hand and said vaguely, "Move your chopsticks, move your chopsticks. You can't just learn how to drink wine. If you don't eat the food, you will feel bored." Back then, I was so poor that I could only rely on the books of the saints to accompany my dishes. Kui Dong, that little bastard, was so stubborn from the beginning. He mistakenly thought that reading while drinking wine was something elegant. Later on, he followed suit. Who would have known that if I had money in my pocket, I would have filled the table with dishes long ago? Damn the books of the saints. Only those who scolded themselves the fiercest would be able to say the most reasonable things. Chen Pinggan picked up some food with his chopsticks and chewed slowly. He took a sip of wine and was very skilled at it. It wasn't that he had nothing to say, but that he didn't know how to open his mouth. He didn't know what to say and what not to say. The old scholar's chopsticks flew and he drank without stopping. Fortunately, Ning Yarrow had bought enough. When the old man's bowl was empty, Chen Pinggan bent down and helped him pour wine. After eating and drinking, Chen Pinggan put the dishes and bowls back into the food box. The old scholar used his sleeve to wipe the wine stains on the chair. In a flash, he landed in front of the shop. The old scholar asked, "Why are you here?" He answered, "I want to see more of you." The old scholar pointed to the empty chair and laughed angrily. "Your swordsmanship is the best. Why don't you sit here?" He glanced at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan had no choice but to give up his small stool and walk around the chair to the old scholar's side. The old scholar could only sit on the chair. Chen Pinggan then sat down. The old scholar asked, "Have you two recognized each other as brothers?" He said, "I don't think so." Chen Pinggan said, "Same." The old scholar sitting on the chair was obviously biased towards his last disciple. He slapped the head of Zhuo He, who was shorter, and said, "What kind of brother are you? You just wanted to learn from a master earlier. Are you blind? How many years have you been single? Let's not talk about other things. Just talking about this important matter, the line of the sage of literature is now relying on your little brother. Will I be able to warm your bed or serve you tea if I run around with this sword?" Chen Pinggan said, "Seniors were wanted to teach me swordsmanship at the top of the city wall. He was worried that my state was too low, so it was a bit difficult for me." Without any suspense, he was slapped again. Zhuo his face darkened. He thought that when the teacher left the Great Wall of Sword Chi, he wouldn't be in a difficult position anymore. Chen Pinggan added, however, when seniors were first met old Mr. Yarrow, he still supported this junior. The old elementary scholar made a sound of acknowledgement and turned his head. He casually said, "Then the slap just now was a mistake. Why didn't you explain yourself? You've been like this since you were young. You should change it in the future. You won't hold a grudge against me for hitting you wrong, right? If you feel wronged, Remember to say it out. If you know you're wrong and can change, don't be stingy. Back in the day, I used this sentence to come up with a lot of profound principles. Even the Buddhas and Taoists were stunned when they heard it. Am I right? Of course, the teacher was right. Zhuhe didn't say anything. However, he decided to teach the kid 2 rounds of swordsmanship. 1 round was definitely not enough. Chen Pinggan suddenly said, "The Deputy Hill Master of the Cliff Academy has always missed. Teacher." This was the first time Chen Pinggan had addressed the sage of literature as a simple teacher. The old scholar burped and pricked up his ears. He pretended to be puzzled and asked, "Who, what? Say it again." Zhuhe rolled his eyes. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Senior Maro misses you very much." The old scholar turned around and leaned on the armrest of the chair. He looked at Chen Pinggan and said with a smile, "Xiaodong, he's most willing to use the stupidest method to teach and educate people. He's very patient and is most like me. He's just like Zhuhe, stubborn and can't change his mind. Back in the day, I was just short of tying him up and stuffing him into a gunny sack and throwing him into the Liji Learning Palace. I was willing to throw away my old face and secretly help him build a good relationship, but he refused to go. As his teacher, I couldn't do anything about it." Zhuhe suddenly asked, "Why didn't you want to admit that you were a teacher back then? Now that you've reached a higher level, you're acknowledging him as your teacher." Chen Pinggan replied, "Back in the day, I didn't even study. How could I acknowledge you as my teacher? Just because you're the sage of literature? If the sage of rites or the sage of literature appeared in front of me and they were willing to accept me, would I acknowledge them? If you're willing to accept a disciple, the disciple has to pick a teacher before entering the school. After reading the books of the 3 religions and 100 schools of thought, I'll finally acknowledge you as my teacher if you're the most knowledgeable. Even if you don't acknowledge me, I'll still diligently acknowledge you as my teacher. That's the only way to show my sincerity." Zhuhe was stunned for a long time. He had seen shameless people before, but he had never seen someone so shameless. "Chen Pinggan, is your family running a shop?" 3 rounds. The old scholar kicked Zhuhe. "Why are you standing there? Bring me some wine." Zhuhe said helplessly, "Teacher, I don't like to drink. Besides, Chen Pinggan has plenty of it." "Zhuhe, you're a bachelor. You don't have to be afraid of owing money." The old Shotsai used a sincere tone to persuade him and patiently said, "Your younger brother is different. He has his own mountain and is about to marry a wife. How much will his expenses be? Back in the day, you helped me manage the money. How could you not know how hard it is to support a family? Show some of your senior brother's demeanor. Don't let others look down on us. If you don't want to bring wine to me, that's fine. Go to the top of the city wall and shout. Say that you're Chen Pinggan's senior brother, so that your junior brother won't be bullied when I'm not here." Zhuhe pretended to be deaf and dumb. In his previous life as a student, this was Zhuhe's biggest protest against his teacher. Chen Pinggan took out 2 jugs of wine and handed them to the old scholar. They were all glutinous rice wine from Longchuan's hometown. All the immortal wine was given to the guard at the inverted mountain. The old scholar handed a jug to Zhuhe. Zhuhe didn't refuse. Chen Pinggan took out a jug for himself. The old scholar smiled and asked, "Zhuhe, how does it taste?" Zhuhe could only say something that didn't go against his conscience. "It's okay." The old scholar shook his head and said, "This is something that only people who don't know how to drink wine would say." The old scholar turned his head and looked at Chen Pinggan. He didn't let the old scholar down. Chen Pinggan smiled. "Free wine tastes the best." The old scholar laughed loudly. After laughing for a long time, he found that Chen Pinggan was looking at him. The old scholar coughed a few times. "Don't worry. In the future, let your senior brother treat you to wine. In the Great Wall of Sword Chi, as long as you drink, whether it's by yourself or with friends, it's all on Zhuhe." "Zhuhe." Zhuhe sighed. "I know." The old scholar shouted again, "Zhuhe." Zhuhe said, "It's okay." Only then was the old scholar satisfied. Chen Pinggan drank the wine. He felt that the more he drank, the more difficult it would be for him in the coming days. Unexpectedly, the old scholar said considerately, Your senior brother Zwe, he has good swordsmanship. But if you don't want to learn, you don't have to. If you want to learn, you can tell him how you want to teach. He won't go too far. Zwe, he said, you can start learning now. Chen Pinggan said immediately, there's no hurry. Zwe, he leaned forward and stared at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan looked at the old scholar. The old scholar understood and immediately pressed his hands on Zwe's head and pushed him back. He scolded, give in to your junior brother. Zwe, he began to drink. It was strange. The sage of literature seemed to treat Zwe the most rudely, but this disciple was always the one who accompanied him the most. Even an in-name disciple like Maro Xiaodong was puzzled by this. It was just that Zwe's personality was too reclusive. Maro Xiaodong, Ma Zhon, and the others didn't dare to take the initiative to talk to him. At that time, Kui Dong, who hadn't betrayed his master yet, was the most dazzling disciple of the sage of literature. All the academies and scholars of the Central Plains were overshadowed by him. His knowledge was high, his cultivation was high, and his chess skills were top-notch. Even so, he was often scolded by Zwe. As for whether Kui Dong was unwilling or not, Maro Xiaodong and the others had no chance to find out. As for Zwe's knowledge, the fact that he was a direct disciple of the sage of literature was enough to explain everything. It was a pity that his swordsmanship overshadowed it. As a result, when people talked about the late bloomer Zwe, they only talked about whether his swordsmanship was very high, extremely high, or the highest in the world. Many people even forgot that he was the disciple of the sage of literature. One person could suppress all the innate sword embryos in the world. This was Zwe. But today, Zwe, who was sitting on the stool in front of the shop, in the old scholar's eyes, was just that tall youth with clear eyes. When he came to visit, he said that he didn't have money, but wanted to read books and learn some principles. If he owed money, he would acknowledge Zwe as his teacher and would pay him back. But if he studied, became the top scholar, and helped Zwe attract more disciples, then he wouldn't pay him back. When the youth said those words, he was very serious. At that time, the poor scholar who was not too old had not become an old scholar, nor had he become the sage of literature. He had just published a book, so he had some money. It wasn't to the extent that he couldn't afford to drink, so he agreed. He thought that it would be ridiculous if Zwe didn't have a junior brother by his side. Moreover, the poor scholar felt that his biggest wish in life was to have students all over the world. If he had a first disciple, then he would have a second disciple. It would be a good thing. After all, it was a good saying that one couldn't travel 1,000 miles without accumulating silicon. At that time, he was only a scholar, so he didn't think too much about it. He didn't think too far ahead. He even thought that having students all over the world was just an unattainable dream. It was just like when he was in a shabby alley, drinking half a kilo of turbid wine that he bought at home and thinking about the fine wine that was sold in the big restaurants. Many years had passed, but he could still vaguely remember that there was a restaurant manager's daughter who seemed to be very beautiful. Looking at her from afar was like drinking wine. You couldn't look at her for too long, or you would be intoxicated. Therefore, in the future, there was a Confucian sage who interpreted one of the old man's books. He described the old man as a sanctimonious man and was too old-fashioned. He changed the original meaning of the book a lot, which made the old scholar very angry. It was natural for men and women to be attracted to each other. Humans were not plants and couldn't be emotionless. Moreover, even plants and trees could turn into spirits. Humans were not sages, so how could they not make mistakes? Moreover, sages also made mistakes, so they shouldn't expect ordinary teachers to be sages everywhere. If such knowledge became the only one, it wouldn't pull scholars closer to sages, but gradually push them away. The old scholar went to the Confucian temple and tried to reason with them. The other party was also very stubborn. Anyway, he listened to everything the old scholar said, but he didn't quarrel with the old scholar. However, it was precisely this kind of saint, who was suspected of being unreasonable, who, at the cost of exhausting his own cultivation, forcibly held up the entrance to the vast world. It was only when the old elementary scholar and the scholar holding the immortal sword appeared in front of him that he finally put down his burden and quietly passed away. He smiled knowingly at the old elementary scholar and passed away. His soul was completely scattered and there was no afterlife to speak of. Life was so sudden. They looked at each other and smiled. The old scholar finished a pot of wine. He didn't hurry to get up and leave the chair. He hugged the wine pot with both hands and basked in the sun of another world. Zhuyu said softly, "Teacher, you can leave now. Otherwise, the ascendant realm monsters in this world may come together to stop you from leaving." Chen Pinggan was just about to get up and speak. The old scholar raised his hand and gently pressed it down. "You don't have to say anything. Teacher knows. Teacher has many things to say, so I won't say much to you for the time being." The old scholar leaned back in the chair leisurely and murmured to himself, "Let's sit for a while more." Teacher hasn't had two students sitting beside him at the same time for many years. There were two students on his left and right. Teacher sat in the middle. Teacher finally didn't only have Zhuyu and Zhuyu beside him. 581. Autumn went and winter came. Time passed. If he did not raise his head and see the outline of the Great Wall of Sword Qi in the south, Chen Pinggan would have mistakenly thought that he was in paper white blessed land, or that he had drunk yellow liang blessed land's worry-free wine. Even though Chen Pinggan practiced diligently and did not slack off every day, and could even be said to be very busy, Chen Pinggan still felt that it was not enough, so he asked Grandma Bai to help him. Unexpectedly, Grandma Bai was not willing to give her all, and at most taught the future son-in-law some boxing moves. Chen Pinggan could only reluctantly practice boxing, and called Grandpa Naylan to the practice field in the mustard small world to familiarize himself with the flying sword of a pure jade realm sword cultivator. At the same time, he roughly learned the art of concealment and stealth from this assassin who had fallen from the immortal realm, and many exquisite techniques that involved the fundamentals of cultivation. Close in the day is like moving in the night. Only sword cultivators could do this, which made Chen Pinggan feel a little regretful. Besides this, whenever he was free, Chen Pinggan tried to go to the wine shop every day to take a look. Every time, he would stay for a few hours. He did not help to sell wine, and just hung out with a bunch of big kids and young girls, continuing to be his storyteller. At most, he would be the calligraphy teacher and recitation teacher, and did not involve himself in imparting any knowledge. Although Chen Pinggan had become a hands-off shopkeeper, the head shopkeeper, Stack Zhong, did not complain. This was because second shopkeeper Chen was the one who was responsible for making money. Now, it was time for him to be lazy. In the end, Stack Zhong had only taken out some capital and put in some rigid effort. Moreover, after the successful opening of the wine shop, there were many more tricks. For example, after hanging the couplets, there was a new horizontal scroll. "Those who drink my wine can break through the realm." The shopkeepers of the restaurants and wine shops on the street were about to collapse. Not to mention that they had stolen a lot of business, the key point was that they had obviously lost their momentum. This led to almost everywhere in the wine shop of the Great Wall of Sword Qi to hang couplets and horizontal scrolls. But after looking around, many drunkards and sword cultivators felt that this place was the best, or the most shameless. After almost all the wine shops began to copy, this shop began to have a new method. Inside the shop, there was a pile of small wooden plaques in the style of Safe and Sound. They were all calligraphy treasures left behind by sword cultivators who had come to drink wine. All of them were hung on the wall, saying that it was a good omen. It was not based on cultivation level. Whoever wrote first would be able to hang up their wooden plaque first. The front of the plaque would be written with the name of the wine shop's customer. If they were willing, they could write on the back of the wooden plaque. They could write whatever they wanted. The wine shop did not care how much they wrote. Now, there were 4 customers who hung Safe and Sound boards on the wall of the wine shop. There was Wei Jin of the Wind Snow Temple in the Aquarius continent, Jiao Kuei of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Sword Immortal Yuan Qingshu of the South Whirlpool continent, and Dao Wen, a sword cultivator of the Raw Jade realm from the North continent who came to drink alone in the middle of the night. They all wrote on the back of the Safe and Sound board. They didn't want to write. Originally, the 4 sword immortals only wrote their names. Later, Chen Pinggan found an opportunity to catch them and forced them to write. Even if they didn't write, there was always a way to make them write. It was an eye-opener for the shy Stack Jong. It turned out that business could be done this way. So Wei Jin wrote, "Trapped by love, the sword can't be drawn." Gao Kue, a man with one eye and a big beard, wrote, "The flowers are beautiful, the moon is round, and the people live long." The elegant and carefree Yuan Qingshu wrote, "Here, the world knows that I, Yuan Qingshu, am a sword immortal." Dao Wen, the sword immortal, was the most tactful. When he heard that he could drink a jar of Bamboo Sea Grotto Heaven wine for free, he wrote, "The wine here is cheap and excellent. It's even better if you can buy it on credit." Among the genius sword cultivators of the youngest generation, there were more than 10 people including Pang Yuanji, Yang Zhuo, Chen Sanqiu, and Dong Huafu. Of course, there was also the little girl Guo Zhujiu. Other than writing her full name Guo Zhujiu and her nickname LV Duan, she secretly wrote, "Master sells wine, disciple buys wine." The relationship between master and disciple is touching and everlasting. There were also many sword cultivators of the Earth Immortal realm who couldn't bring themselves to write, but most of them just left their names and didn't write anything else. What's more, Chen Pinggan didn't take care of the business, so Stack Jong really didn't know how to open his mouth. Later, Chen Pinggan felt that this wouldn't do, so he gave Stack Jong a few slips of paper, saying that if he saw any sword cultivators of the nascent soul stage who were pleasing to the eye, especially those who were actually willing to leave behind their calligraphy but didn't know what to write, he could pass one of the slips to them when they paid the bill. Therefore, an old sword cultivator of the nascent soul stage who had a rough personality and didn't know much about literature saw one of the slips of paper. Originally, he was still pushing Stack Jong to put on airs with the shopkeeper, but he didn't expect that he would immediately change his attitude and secretly keep the slip of paper. He asked Stack Jong to quickly bring him a wooden token and wrote the poem with the serious attitude of facing a big demon. When he left, he even bought an extra jar of the most expensive green immortal mountain wine and deliberately suppressed his sword aura. As he drank to his heart's content, he staggered away and sang loudly. Over and over again, it was the poem The Emergence of New Ideas, I wrote it myself. In the past, it's not enough to praise me for being a romantic. After drinking to my heart's content, Seng Mengqing came to pour wine for me. After a night, among the drunkards and gamblers of the Great Wall of Sword Aura, this nascent soul stage sword cultivator who could write poems for no reason became famous. However, it was said that in the end, he was hit by a sword immortal's flying sword that came out of nowhere and was bedridden for a few days. There was also a relatively young nascent soul stage sword cultivator of the North Continent who claimed to be drinking under the moon. He wrote a sentence on the wooden token, "Half of the sword immortals in the mortal world are my friends. Which woman in the world isn't shy? I used wine to wash my sword. Who doesn't say that I'm a romantic?" The wine shop's Bamboo Sea Grotto Heaven wine was divided into 3 grades. A jar of snow cost money and had the lightest taste. Even better was a jar of wine that cost 5 snow. However, the wine shop announced to the public that in every 100 jars of wine, there would be a valuable bamboo leaf from the Bamboo Sea Grotto Heaven. The sword immortal Wei Jin and the little girl Guo Zhujiu could prove that this was true. The first-class green immortal mountain wine cost 10 snow and it was not guaranteed that one would be able to drink it. This was because the wine shop only sold 1 jar a day. After it was sold, no one would be able to drink it. The customers would have to come again the next day. For a time, the small wine shop was overcrowded. However, after the hustle and bustle passed, there were no longer many sword cultivators squatting on the ground to drink and fight to buy wine. However, the 6 tables were still full. Although Stack Jong was already very satisfied with the shop's income, he could not help but feel a little disappointed. As Chen Pinggan had expected, after the shop became famous, it became very difficult to buy wine. Many restaurants and wine shops would rather break the contract and compensate Stack Jong than sell the original wine. It was obvious that they wanted the shop to cut off its source of income. Once there were a few customers who bought wine but did not sell it, the business would go downhill. It would be a short-lived hustle and bustle, and the business would not last long. Stack Jong could see the imminent problem, and the second-in-command who had left everything to him was naturally even more aware of it. However, Chen Pinggan did not say anything. When he arrived at the wine shop, He would either chat with some of the regular customers and get some wine to drink, or he would be a storyteller at the corner of the street and hang out with the children. Stack Jong did not want to trouble Chen Pingan with everything, so he could only think of a way to break out of this situation. Late one night, Chen Pingan and Ning Yarrow came together to the shop that was about to close. There were no customers drinking wine. Stack Jong took out the account book. Chen Pingan sat to the side and took out a piece of snow to spend money. He ordered the cheapest jug of wine. When the shopkeeper drank, he had to pay. This was the rule. As Chen Pingan drank, he carefully checked the account book. Yang Zwe and the others had already agreed to drink together today because it was rare that Chen Pingan was willing to treat them. Chen Pingan and Ning Yarrow sat on a bench. Yang Zwe sat alone. Dong Huafu and Chen Sancho sat together. Yang Zwe looked at Chen Pingan, who was carefully flipping through the account book, and then looked at Stack Jong, who was sitting to the side. He could not help but ask, "Stack Jong, do you feel that Chen Pingan does not trust you?" Chen Pingan smiled. He did not raise his head to speak. He just raised his wine bowl and took a sip. He admitted that he was not honest, so he was willing to punish himself. Stack Jong said exasperatedly, "What nonsense are you talking about? Don't you have to follow the rules when doing business? We are friends in the first place, that's why we're doing business together. Don't tell me we're not friends if we settle our accounts clearly. Who doesn't make mistakes? When the time comes, whose fault is it? If you make a mistake, it's fine. It's fine. If you are not wrong and I am not wrong, then the business will be ruined. You can't live with the money." Yang Zwe felt wronged. "Stack Jong, you are too biased. How can you be friends with Chen Pingan and do business together? Didn't I get beaten up in the past for nothing?" Stack Jong smiled. "Didn't I say sorry to you?" Yang Zwe was a bit resentful. "You were right. I was quite happy. Now I feel that you are not sincere enough." Chen Pingan flipped through the account book and joked, "A friend having a new friend is always so annoying." Yang Zwe waved his hand. "It's not like that at all." Chen Pingan passed over the wine bowl and clinked it with Yang Zwe's. He smiled and said, "I saw that you, the young master of the Yang family, have big shoulders and big round shoulders. Everywhere you are filled with money, but every time you are stingy to buy the cheapest wine. You are not as generous as a young girl, so I casually talked about you." Stack Jong seemed to hesitate. Finally, he gathered his courage and said, "Yang Zwe, Sancho, can I discuss something with you?" Yang Zwe was a bit puzzled. Chen Sancho seemed to have guessed it. He smiled and nodded. "It can be discussed." Yang Zwe's eyes brightened. "Pull us in. Like I said, those jars of wine in your house, I glanced at them, and then I thought about the customers coming in and out every day, and I knew that there were only a few jars left. Now, all the restaurants, big and small, are jealous, so the source of wine has become a big problem, right? You don't even need to look for Sancho. He's a pampered young master who doesn't do any household chores. He's a master who only knows how to lie down and enjoy life. He doesn't understand these things at all. I'm different. I've helped out a lot of my family's businesses. It's not difficult for me to help you get some lower-cost raw wine. Don't worry, Stack Jong, we'll do as you say. We'll follow the rules. I won't lose too much of my family's business." Stack Jong's expression was complicated. Chen Pingan felt a little helpless. He closed the account book and said with a smile, "There are two kinds of happiness when a shopkeeper makes money. The first kind is when the celestial coins are safely in his bag. Every day, when the shop is closed, he calculates the profits on the abacus. The second kind is when he enjoys the feeling of being able to make money even though it is not easy. Fatty Yang, tell me, isn't this the truth? You are carrying a sack of silver to the shop. I don't think Stack Jong is willing to calculate. Fatty Yang, you can just tell me the number." Yangs were suddenly understood. "You should have said it earlier, Stack Jong. If you had said it earlier, I would have understood." Stack Jong angrily said, "Blame me?" Yangs were drank the wine and begged for mercy. "Blame me, blame me." Chen Pingan began to change the topic. He told Stack Jong about the reasons for profit and loss and things to pay attention to. In fact, It wasn't that Yang Zhuo didn't understand this principle. He should have understood it long ago. It was just that some of the estrangement between good friends could be big or small and dispensable. Some unintentional words that hurt others were not willing to be intentionally explained. They would feel that it was too deliberate, or they might feel that they lost face. If they were lucky, it didn't matter. It was just a matter of a lifetime. A small matter was a small matter. If there was something more important to do to make up for it, it didn't matter. If they were unlucky, they would no longer be friends. If they were unlucky, they wouldn't say anything. Everyone, including Ning Yao, had their own barriers to overcome. It wasn't just Stack Zhong who was born in a shabby alley among all their friends. Chen Pinggan was just taking advantage of the opportunity to speak tactfully. As a bystander, he helped the two see through and say it out loud. If it was too early, it wouldn't work. If it was too late, for example, Yang Zhuo and Stack Zhong each felt that Chen Pinggan was their best friend. It wouldn't be too appropriate. These thoughts couldn't be said. If they were said, there would be less wine and only water left. Therefore, Chen Pinggan could only think about it himself. It might even make Chen Pinggan feel that he was too calculating. In the past, Chen Pinggan would feel guilty and full of self-denial. Now, he wouldn't. Every bit of kindness needed to be protected with even greater kindness. Chen Pinggan believed in the phrase "good people will be rewarded." Moreover, it was a kind of sincere belief. However, he couldn't only expect God to reward him. In life, he had to deal with people everywhere. In fact, everyone was God. There was no need to blindly ask for external help. He only knew how to ask for higher things. No matter how much he thought about the affairs of the world, it seemed that he wasn't sincere enough. However, if he followed the rules, what he did in the end would not harm others. In fact, whether it was big or small, it would indeed benefit the world. Then, he shouldn't be restrained because of this. After doing something, he should ask himself and slowly sharpen his conscience. This was the cultivation of the heart. This was what his teacher, the literary sage, meant when he said that there was no harm in thinking more. Even if he later realized that he was just going around in circles and returning to his original place, it was still the best effort. He didn't ask for anything from heaven and earth. Heaven and earth could have another person who sought to do good. Not only could he be self-sufficient, but he could also benefit others. Wasn't that wonderful? Wasn't that good? The one in heaven and earth would never change. Only the human heart could be increased or decreased. The 3 schools of knowledge and the hundreds of schools of thought, in the end, all of them put effort into this matter. After chatting, they just drank with friends. Chen Sancho told them a piece of news. Recently, there would be a sword immortal from the North Continent rushing to the Great Wall of Sword Qi. It seemed that he had already arrived at the inverted mountain. However, there were sword immortals here who were returning home. The sword immortals of the North Continent were usually like this. Usually, they would return after a big battle. However, the 2 big battles in the past 10 years had caught them off guard. Most of the sword immortals of the North Continent had taken the initiative to stay here and fight another battle. However, there were still some sword immortals and earth immortals who had no choice but to leave the Great Wall of Sword Qi. After all, they still had their sects to worry about. Regarding this, the Great Wall of Sword Qi would not say anything. Not only would there be no complaints, every time a sword immortal from a foreign land prepared to leave, there would be an unwritten rule. The few local sword immortals who were familiar with him would have to treat him to a drink and send him off. It was considered a return gift from the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Chen Pinggan and Ning Yao turned to look at the main street almost at the same time. 6 people walked over. They were all sword immortals. One of them was a female sword immortal. Not only did Chen Pinggan recognize her, but he was also quite familiar with her. She was the sect leader of the North Continent's Fuping Sword Lake, Li Cai. She had once said that after the newly ascended sword immortal Liu Jinglong of the Taihui sword sect, he would come to the Great Wall of Sword Qi to fight. Besides fulfilling his promise with his good friend Li Yu of the Taixia Peak, he would also kill another great demon for the latter who had failed to break through and had passed away. Chen Pinggan only recognized one of the other 5. He was a tall old man with snow-white hair and a beard who was walking at the front. He had a bad temper. Back then, Chen Pinggan had seen and heard with his own eyes that this old man had called the old sword immortal by his name and loudly questioned why Chen Pinggan had killed Dong Guanpu. This old master of the Dong family had almost fought with the old sword immortal. He had said, "Others are afraid of you, Chen Pinggan, but I'm not." Therefore, Chen Pinggan had a deep impression of this old man. He was also curious about Dong Guanpu, who had been casually killed by the old sword immortal. This was because according to Ning Yarrow, Dong Guanpu's little grandpa Dong was actually a very nice person. It could only be said that this was the so-called every family has its own difficulties. In a great wall of sword chi, there were too many talented sword immortals and even more disturbances. Dong Sangeng and Li Cai, who had just arrived at the Great Wall of Sword Chi, seemed to have come for this small wine shop. Chen Pinggan looked at the other 4 sword immortals and guessed the identities of 2 of them. They were the sect master of the Taihui sword sect, Han Huizi, and the patriarch of the ancestral hall, Huang Tong. Chen Pinggan and the others had already stood up. Dong Huafu called Dong Sangeng old ancestor and then said something fair, "The shop doesn't keep records." Dong Sangeng stared and said, "Don't you have money on you?" Dong Huafu shook his head and said, "I never spend money when I drink." Dong Sangeng laughed heartily and said, as expected of a descendant of the Dong family. In the entire Great Wall of Sword Chi, only the sons of the Dong family would do such a shameless thing. Stack Mountain could not help but tremble. This old man was the head of the Dong family, Dong Sangeng. He was the old sword immortal who carved the word Dong on the city wall. The most annoying thing for Alliance in the past was to spar with Dong Sangeng. If he could dodge, he would. If he could not, he would ask Dong Sangeng to pay. If he did not pay, he, Alliance, would obediently stand beside the thatched cottage on the city wall and take a beating. He would not go to the city wall and disturb the sword immortal's rest. Fine, he would lie on the roof of the Dong family's ancestral hall. Dong Sangeng waved his hand and put 2 tables together. He said to the juniors, "Don't talk nonsense. Just bring the wine to the table." Chen Pinggan took the initiative to nod to Li Cai. Li Cai smiled and also nodded. Unexpectedly, the Taihui sword sect's patriarch, Huang Tong, took the initiative to smile at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan could only cup his fists and bow. He did not say anything. After Dong Sangeng sat down, he glanced at the couplet at the entrance of the shop and said, "He really dares to write. Fortunately, the words are written well. Liang is much better at crawling than an earthworm." Beads of sweat had already involuntarily seeped out of his forehead. Chen Sanchiu and Yang Zhuo were also a little uneasy. They had no choice. When they came to Dong Sangeng's side, they could not even get scolded. Most of their family clan's sword immortal elders had been beaten up. The only ones who could be considered calm were probably Ning Yarrow and Chen Pinggan. Dong Sangeng drank a pot of wine and stood up to leave. The other 2 sword immortals from the Great Wall of Sword Chi bade farewell and left as well. Han Huizi, Huang Tong, and Li Cai, who were also from the North Continent, stayed behind. Chen Pinggan got Stacked Mountain to bring another pot of good wine from the shop. He carried it and walked over. Junior Chen Pinggan greets Sect Master Han, Sect Master Li, and Sword Immortal Huang. Li Cai smiled and said, "Huang Tong, listen. I'm in front of you. This is the consequence of not being a sect master." Chen Pinggan was a little helpless. This was Sword Immortal Li Cai not following the rules of the pugilistic world. Unexpectedly, Huang Tong smiled and said, "I'm behind Sect Master Li." "That's great. It doesn't matter if I'm above or below you." Chen Pinggan, who had just sat down, nearly fell over. He could not care less about etiquette. He quickly drank a mouthful of wine to calm himself down. When he was roaming the North Continent, he had never heard of this sword immortal from the Taihui sword sect being such a sentimental person. Why did Qi Jinglong not say anything about it? Was it a taboo for a supremacy? It seemed like Huang Tong's swordsmanship was not weak. Li Cai sneered and said, "I hope you drown and feed the fishes on this intercontinental ferry." Huang Tong laughed out loud. He was not angry at all. Instead, he was delighted. Han Huizi, on the other hand, was an extremely steady elder with the demeanor of a sword immortal. He smiled at Chen Pinggan and said, "Ignore their nonsense." Huang Tong's smile disappeared, and he no longer looked like a disrespectful old man. Now, the flying sword messages from the inverted hanging mountain are closely monitored, and many of them have even been sealed without authorization. There's no way to reason with them. Fortunately, our Qi Jinglong's letter was cleverly written, so it wasn't blocked and sealed. Since Chen Pinggan and our Liu Jinglong are close friends, and Li Cai, you're a sword cultivator from our hometown, then the four of us here can be considered as family members. First of all, I would like to thank you, Li Cai, for taking the initiative to ask for the sword and helping Qi Jinglong get off to a good start. The one who is on good terms with the academy followed closely behind and forced that old man, Bai Chang, to take care of his reputation. That is why Qi Jinglong not only gained a foothold in the North Continent as a sword immortal, but also gained benefits from the sword Dao 3 times in a row. Our Taihui sword sect owes you a huge favor for this matter. At this point, Huang Tong smiled slightly. So, if Sect Master Li wants to choose from the front and back, you can choose from the back. If I, Huang Tong, say no or frown, then I am not manly enough. Li Cai pursed her lips and said, "Let me tell you a piece of good news. Jiang Shangzhen is already in the immortal realm." Huang Tong immediately said, "I, Huang Tong, am a sword immortal. That is enough. So what if I am not manly?" That B***starred Jiang Shangzhen was the common nightmare of both male and female cultivators in the North Continent. Back then, his golden core could be used as a nascent soul. In the future, he was also famous for being able to be used as an immortal in the unpolished Jade Realm. What about the immortal realm now? Even if they did not talk about this guy's cultivation level, who would be willing to be involved with a guy who was running around while carrying a dung pit? If they punched Jiang Shangzhen or swung their sword, they would really be excreted. The key was that this person was vengeful and good at running away, so even Huang Tong was not willing to provoke him. In the history of the North Continent, there was once an old nascent soul cultivator who did not believe in heresy. He did not hesitate to spend 20 years to kill this scourge who was hated by everyone but could not be killed. In the end, he did not earn much, and his sect ended up in a terrible state. Jiang Shangzhen made up a lot of stories about the love and hate entanglement of the entire sect. He wrote a few big books about the love and hate of the entire sect, the kind with pictures. Moreover, Jiang Shangzhen liked to give free gifts to everyone he met. If you don't accept it, I, Jiang Shangzhen, will give you money. Are you going to accept it or not? If you accept it, can you at least flip through a few pages? Han Huizi smiled and said, "Senior brother, there is still a junior here. Even if you don't care about your own identity, you should at least help Jinglong make a good impression." Huang Tong coughed and took a sip of wine. He continued, "Li Cai, let's get down to business. The customs of the Great Wall of Sword Qi seem similar to those of the North Continent, but they are very different. The battle on the southern side of the city wall is very different from the catch and kill that we are familiar with. Many cultivators from other continents often die in the first few days of the battle. If they are not careful, they will die. Don't think that you can do anything just because you are a sword cultivator in the pure Jade realm. On the battlefield, when you fight, you scheme against each other. There are also extremely sinister existences among the demon clan." Huang Tong twisted his wrist and took out 3 books from the items in front of him. 2 of them were old and 1 was new. He pushed them towards Li Cai, who was sitting opposite him. These 2 books are engraved from the Great Wall of Sword Qi. One is an introduction to the demon clan, the other is similar to a military book. The last one is my experience after experiencing 2 great battles. Let me give you a piece of advice. If you don't memorize these 3 books by heart, then I will propose a toast to you. When we reach the North Continent's Taihui sword sect in the future, I will not sacrifice Li Cai for your death in battle. This is because Li Cai is asking for death. You are not worthy of me, Huang Tong, sacrificing my sword for you. Li Cai kept the 3 books and nodded. This is a matter of life and death. I don't dare to be arrogant. Huang Tong sighed and turned to look at his junior brother, who was also the sect master of the Tai Hui sword sect. Miss Li, there are no experts in the sect, so she has to do it herself. Don't we still have me, Huang Tong, to support the Tai Hui sword sect? Junior brother, you know that I am not good at handling affairs. I have no patience when it comes to teaching disciples. You also know that when you return to the North Continent, you can help Jinglong ascend and escort him. Isn't that good? The Great Wall of Sword Qi is not without Tai Hui sword sect's sword immortals. I am there. Han Huizi shook his head. You and I have already agreed on this. You don't have to persuade me to change my mind. Huang Tong said angrily, agreed my ass. I can't beat you, so I can only scram back to the North Continent. Han Huizi said indifferently, when you return to the Tai Hui sword sect, just practice your swordsmanship well. Huang Tong was very worried. He drank a big bowl of wine. But you are still the sect master. If you leave and leave Huang Tong behind, the Tai Hui sword sect will have a clear conscience. Han Huizi said, I am guilty. Since the establishment of the Tai Hui sword sect, no sect master has died in battle at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, nor has there been any Ascendant Realm sword immortals. As for the latter, there is hope with Liu Jinglong around. So I can rest assured that I will do the former. Huang Tong left dejectedly. However, before going to the inverted hanging mountain, Huang Tong went to the wine shop and wrote his name with sword energy. He also wrote a sentence on the back. When the old man left, he was desolate and did not have the slightest aura of a sword immortal. After Li Cai heard about the wine shop's rules, she was also very excited. She only wrote her name but did not write anything on the back of the nameplate. She only said that she would write it after she killed 2 upper 5 realms monsters. Han Huizi also wrote his name and words. Tai Hui Sword Sect's 4th generation sect master, Han Huizi. I have no regrets in this life. During this period, Chen Pinggan had been drinking quietly. When Li Cai and Han Huizi, the 2 sect masters of the North Continent, left side by side, they walked on the lonely street in the dead of night. Chen Pinggan stood up and shouted, Sect Masters. Han Huizi laughed softly and said, Don't look back. Unexpectedly, Li Cai had already turned her head and asked, What's the matter? Chen Pinggan smiled and said, Money for the drinks. Li Cai asked Han Huizi, puzzled, Do we have to pay to drink in the Great Wall of Sword Qi? Han Huizi said with a calm expression, I don't know. Li Cai frowned. Just put it on Jiang Shengzhen's tab. If a piece of snow costs money, then put it on the tab. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. The 2 sword immortals walked slowly. Li Cai felt that it was a little strange. Logically speaking, with Chen Pinggan's temper, he should not be like this. She turned her head to look. The young man had his hands in his sleeves and was looking at the 2 of them. When he saw Li Cai turn her head, he sat back down at the table. Han Huizi laughed in his mind and said, This young man is just looking for something to talk about. He probably thinks that it's good to talk more. Li Cai said helplessly, What's this about? Han Huizi thought for a moment and actually gave an answer. Sword cultivators and sword cultivators. 582. When Ning Yaro and Diao Zhong returned to the shop, Diao Zhong suddenly stopped, not daring to go forward. Because Diao Zhong was in awe of the man who suddenly appeared in front of his shop. The other party was a famous great sword immortal left and right. Ordinary sword cultivators from other continents, no matter how bad their temper was in their hometown, had to restrain themselves at the Great Sword Qi Wall. Senior left and right was different. As soon as they arrived at the Great Sword Qi Wall, a local immortal realm sword immortal stationed at the top of the city wall tried to ask Senior left and right who was regarded as the best swordsman in the vast world. In the end, Senior left and right only replied, You can't learn my swordsmanship, but there is one thing you can learn from me. If you can't win a fight, just don't fight. At that time, the hidden official also said, Seems like it. The highly anticipated spar on top of the city wall didn't happen. After the shock, Diao Zhong was full of curiosity. Why did the other party restrain his sword qi? The whole city knew that sword immortal left and right always had sword chi lingering around them. During the war, they used sword chi to open a path deep into the demon army's hinterland. It was also the same when they tempered their sword chi alone on top of the city wall. But today, the best swordsman in the vast world restrained his sword chi, and for the first time, didn't reveal any. Ning Yarrow took Diao Zhong to go shopping again. Ning Yarrow knew that old master Wen Sheng had left, so she returned. She didn't expect that left and right was still there. Before the old man left, he even made a special trip to greet her and thank her. Ning Yarrow was actually a bit confused at this moment. She didn't know what matter she had to be thanked by an old sage of literature. As for the subtle relationship between Chen Pinggan and left and right, it wasn't hard for Ning Yarrow to understand what they were thinking, so she didn't say anything to Chen Pinggan. What she said was not appropriate. Besides, Chen Pinggan had his own opinions on important matters in life. He didn't need Ning Yarrow to tell him what to do. Diao Zhong couldn't hold back his curiosity. After walking far away, he asked Ning Yarrow with the ripples of the Heart Lake, Chen Pinggan knows left and right sword immortal left? Ning Yarrow nodded. They have known each other for a long time. They were all written in Chen Pinggan's travel notes on mountains and rivers, and the length was not small. Diao Zhong smiled. Can you tell me more? Ning Yarrow shook her head. No. Dui Zhong pulled on Ning Yarrow's sleeve, gently swaying it. It was clear that she was about to act spoiled. She pitifully said, Big sister Ning, you can talk about anything. There's always something to talk about. Ning Yarrow thought for a moment. You should ask Chen Pinggan yourself. He plans to open a shop with you. You can use this as a condition. Don't agree yet. Dui Zhong quickly figured out the meaning behind Ning Yarrow's words. Ning Yarrow had clearly dug a trap for him. Dui Zhong angrily smiled and said, I never intended to do business with him. Ning Yarrow, you should know when to stop. Ning Yarrow smiled and said, It's really not that I'm siding with an outsider, but Chen Pinggan is right. You're not smart enough when it comes to doing business. If it's him, I guarantee that you'll have a steady flow of money. Ning Yarrow frowned, wanting to say something but hesitating. Ning Yarrow glanced at her, immediately knowing what she was thinking. She explained, Chen Pinggan has a square-inch object and 2 near objects on him. Besides the common wine from his hometown and a pile of bamboo leaves, he doesn't have anything else. If he really wanted to learn from the many merchants that crossed continents on the Great Wall of Sword Chi, selling all sorts of things to earn immortal money from us sword cultivators, then Chen Pinggan wouldn't waste God's gifts like this. He would have stuffed them to the brim long ago. So, Chen Pinggan wants to do business with you. Earning money from his conscience is a habit. Chen Pinggan has liked to earn money since he was young, not just because he likes money. For this, I must speak up for him. Diao Zhong was relieved, a smile returning to her face. That's good. Otherwise, I would have scolded him in front of his face for being blinded by lard. I don't want to be a new friend. Not long after the old scholar left, she gently placed the wine jug in her hand on a chair. She didn't like drinking to begin with, and suppressing her sword chi was troublesome. She was the only one in the world who disliked having too much sword chi in her body. Chen Pinggan was still taking small sips of wine, looking quite carefree. Zhuyu sneered, without teacher's favoritism, pretending to be calm and composed, isn't it tiring? Chen Pinggan was determined not to speak. Zhuyu asked, previously, I didn't know that teacher would come to the Great Wall of Sword Chi. There was no problem in inviting Chen Qingdou out. Now that teacher is here, why don't you take the initiative to ask? Whether he agrees or not is teacher's business. Whether you ask or not is your etiquette as a student. Chen Pinggan also put down the wine jug and sat on the chair. He folded his hands in his sleeves and leaned forward, looking at the street that was being renovated. He said softly, It's not like I don't know teacher's current situation. Would I make things difficult for teacher by asking? If teacher doesn't make things difficult, wouldn't this student feel uneasy? Even if I feel guilty, if I bring trouble to the entire Great Wall of Sword Chi, pulling one hair will affect the whole body, directly leading to a war between the two sides. When teacher leaves, would he really not feel difficult? Zhuyu nodded, agreeing with this answer. Teacher worries too much, disciple should share his worries. Zuoyu remembered the tall and big Maro Xiaodong, but his memory was a little fuzzy. He only remembered that he was a young man who studied seriously all year round. Among the many registered disciples, he was not the smartest. He studied slowly, liked to ask people questions, and was slow to understand. Kui Dong often teased Maro Xiaodong for being a blockhead who only gave answers but was never willing to explain in detail. Only Xiao Qi would be patient and talk more with Maro Xiaodong. Zuoyu said slowly, in the early years, Maro Xiaodong was unwilling to seek refuge in Li Ji Academy and insisted on being tied to the Sage of Literature. He also accompanied Xiao Qi to Aquarius Continent to establish Cliff Academy. At that time, teacher actually said very serious words, saying that Maro Xiaodong should not be so selfish and only seek peace of conscience. Why not raise his ambition to a higher level, and should not have such sectarian views? If he could use greater knowledge to benefit the world, it was not important whether he was in the Sage of Literature or not. Then, Maro Xiaodong, who I had never looked up to in my entire life, said something that made me admire him. Maro Xiaodong opened his mouth and shouted at the teacher. He said that his disciple, Maro Xiaodong, was slow-witted and only knew to respect his teacher first. Only then would he have a clear conscience. The order of the two couldn't be wrong. After teacher heard this, he was happy and sad, but he did not force Maro Xiaodong to join the Sage of Rites anymore. Chen Pinggan picked up the wine pot again and drank a mouthful. I went to the Great Sui Kingdom Academy twice, and senior brother Maro was very concerned, afraid that I would go astray. When senior brother Maro was reasonable, he had the demeanor of the Confucian sage and the headmaster. Zuoyu smiled. That's because you didn't see him being strangled by me and unable to speak. When talking to teacher, no matter how good the reason is, you can't spit on teacher's face. What do you think? Junior brother. Chen Pinggan quietly put the wine pot back on the chair and only dared to make a sound, still not saying a word. Zuoyu stood up, grabbed the wine pot on the chair with one hand, and then looked at the food box at his feet. Chen Pinggan stood up and said, "I'll pay for it myself." Zuoyu looked at Chen Pinggan again. Chen Pinggan had to continue, "It will be the same in the future." Zuoyu was ready to leave. Chen Pinggan suddenly said, "I hope I didn't let senior brother down." Zuoyu was silent for a moment, then slowly said, "It's okay." Chen Pinggan was relieved and said with a smile, "That's good." Zuoyu hesitated for a moment, then said, "From today on, if someone says something weird to you, saying that you only have today's achievements because you are born in the Sage of Literature, you don't have to talk nonsense with them. Directly send a message to the top of the city wall with your flying sword. I will teach them a lesson." Chen Pinggan was speechless. He was really not used to it. Zuoyu paused for a moment, then added, "Teach them even their parents and elders." Chen Pinggan saw that Zuoyu seemed to be a little impatient. It seemed that he was going to teach him swordsmanship first. He thought of the widespread saying among wild cultivators, "A dead friend is not a dead friend." He quickly nodded and said, "I'll remember it." Zuoyu no longer suppressed his sword qi and turned into a rainbow to go to the top of the city wall. From the city to the top of the city wall, wherever Zuoyu's sword qi passed, the abundant ancient sword will between heaven and earth, made a fleeting path. When he reached the top of the city wall, Zuoyu's sword qi gently rolled up his sleeve. There was a bound book inside. It was given to teacher by Chen Pinggan, but teacher had secretly left it to him for some reason. He even hid it from his most beloved disciple, Chen Pinggan. Zuoyu used sword qi to isolate a small world, then drank and read. He placed the book on the top of the city wall in front of him. With a thought, the sword qi would open the book. Zuoyu unknowingly finished the wine in the pot and turned to look at the sky. Teacher had left. Ever since teacher became the most down-and-out Confucian sage in the world, he had always been smiling. Zuoyu knew that it was not true happiness. His disciples were scattered and wandering, and teacher was feeling guilty. Only after seeing the arrogant junior brother who was willing to recognize him as teacher, even if teacher did not smile much or speak much, even if they had already separated, he was destined to be smiling at this moment. That Chen Pinggan might not know that if he came to the Great Wall of Sword Qi and heard that Zuoyu was at the top of the city wall, he would rush to him and call him senior brother. Zuoyu would be disappointed. Why did little Chi choose such a junior brother? If he secretly built the ancestral hall in his hometown and hung teacher's portrait, he would take the initiative to ask for credit, and Zhuyu would be even more disappointed. Why did teacher choose such a disciple? If he felt that this person's swordsmanship was not low, he wanted to learn the sword. Zhuyu would be the most disappointed. Why did you recognize such a junior brother? But there was nothing. That was the junior brother that Zhuyu had been looking forward to for 100 years. In fact, it was even better than the image of the little junior brother that only existed in his imagination. That year when they parted at the Flood Dragon Ravine, Zhuyu had not said anything, hoping that Chen Pinggan could do one thing. Unexpectedly, not only did Chen Pinggan do it, but he did it very well. Traversing the 3 continents and seeing the mountains and rivers. So after Zhuyu read the contents of the book, he understood why teacher deliberately left this book to him. So at this moment, Zhuyu felt that when he said it's okay at the door of the shop earlier, would it make junior brother sad? If teacher was there at that time, he would probably beat him up again. Zhuyu did not look away for a long time. The way of heaven and earth is broad and deep, high and bright, and long. Pity the worries in my heart, the sun and moon pass by, like clouds coming. After Zhuyu left without drawing his sword, Chen Pinggan heaved a sigh of relief. If he said he was not nervous, he would be deceiving himself. He quickly packed up the chairs and put them back in the shop, and then he sat on the threshold, waiting for Ning Yaro and Dezhang to return. When Zhuyu came, he did not make a sound, but when he left, he did not deliberately hide the traces of the sword aura. So most of the sword immortals at the Great Wall of Sword Aura should be aware of Zhu유's movement when he left the city. Moreover, Zhuyu sitting openly at the door of the shop was in itself a kind of silent message. Before the old scholar appeared on his disciples' left and right, he actually used a magical power to cover the heaven and earth, so that only the shop would know. After Zhuyu arrived, the old scholar removed the spell. The sage of literature always thought too much, and after thinking too much, they always acted decisively, so they seemed to be the most unreasonable. When Ning Yaro and Dezhang returned, Chen Pinggan stood up and said with a smile, "I'm here to entertain guests, Miss Dezhang." Dezhang smiled and asked, "I won't ask about your identity, but why did the great sword immortals take the initiative to come here and drink with you? I have to ask, lest I lose all my belongings in the future, and I don't know who I can complain to." Chen Pinggan said, "To my left and right are my eldest senior apprentice brothers. The one who sat in the middle was our teacher, the sage of literature of the Confucian school." In the Great Wall of Sword Aura, there was no meaning in having a backer. There would be no shortage of fights that needed to be fought, and there would be battlefields that needed to be fought. Moreover, his student Kui Dongshan was right. There was no need to deliberately hide the teacher and senior apprentice brothers that he had earned with his own abilities. Dezhang silently walked into the shop. There was no way to chat. Ning Yaro and Chen Pinggan sat together on the doorsill. Ning Yaro said softly, "Fortunately, the boss sword immortal is personally watching over the city, not allowing anyone to go south for any reason. Otherwise, you will be in danger in the next battle. The monster race is scheming a lot." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Teacher and senior apprentice brothers will both know what to do." Ning Yaro nodded. "What should we do next?" Chen Pinggan said, "Cultivate diligently and refine more qi. Strive to enter the abode realm as soon as possible and refine it into a natal item on the 1st and 15th day of the lunar year. At the same time, hone the golden body realm. Once you enter the remote wandering realm, it will be much easier to fight. However, these 2 things are difficult to achieve for the time being. Among them, it is said that gathering enough natal items of the 5 elements is as difficult as ascending to heaven. The 2 natal items of metal and fire can only be found by chance. If it is really impossible, don't deliberately pursue too high a grade. You must first build a growth and life bridge to deal with the next battle. Ning Yao, you don't have to persuade me on this matter. I have carefully weighed the pros and cons based on the grade of the 3 natal items. Let's not talk about other matters on the path of cultivation. Just the natal items alone are enough to support me until I reach the Earth Immortal or even the Jade Unyielding realm. I can't be too demanding on perfection. On the path of cultivation, I really can't be too slow. Otherwise, I won't be able to enter the middle 5 realms of chi refinement. It is inevitable that my spirit chi will be scattered and my martial arts realm will reach the 7th realm. When I circulate pure vital chi, it will more or less clash with spirit chi, which will actually drag down my combat power. During this period. Speaking of this, Chen Pinggan frowned and sighed. I still have to learn swordsmanship from senior brother. Ning Yarrow said, isn't that good? Senior Zhuo is the most suitable and the most qualified person to teach you swordsmanship. Don't forget, your senior brother is not a carnate sword embryo. Chen Pinggan said helplessly, I can't lie down in the Ning mansion and drink medicine every few days. Ning Yarrow said with a smile, it's okay. When I was at the Li Zhu Grotto Heaven, I learned how to brew medicine from you, but I never had a chance to put it to use. Chen Pinggan tried to hold back, but in the end, he couldn't. It's not like I haven't seen you brew medicine personally. Even if you dare to do it, I don't dare to drink it. Ning Yarrow said, now that you have acknowledged senior brother, your words have become tougher. Chen Pinggan immediately said bitterly, I will drink it, like wine. Dezhang looked at the two at the door and shook her head. She was so jealous. Chen Pinggan thought of something. He turned his head and said with a smile, Miss Dezhang, as long as I can help the shop earn money, how about we split it 40-60? Dezhang smiled and said, isn't it a bit too little? Chen Pinggan said, then it's only 30-70. Miss Dezhang, your business is really a bit unconventional. No wonder your business is so good. Dezhang was so angry that she couldn't speak. Ning Yarrow was somewhat gloating. Chen Pinggan said with a smile, even immortals can't earn extra money from this grocery shop. I know I'm going to stay at the Great Wall of Sword Chi for a long time, so I brought some ordinary wine from my hometown. How about we open a small wine shop together? We only need to put some tables and chairs outside the shop, and we won't have to worry about not having enough seats. As long as the wine is good, squatting on the ground and drinking it is also good. Dezhang curiously said, you said it yourself that it's ordinary wine from the market. Even if we have a lot of drunkards here, even if the shop can sell it, there will be a time when it's sold out. Besides, if the price is too high, it's easy to ruin people's character. I don't have that kind of face to cheat people. Chen Pinggan took out a green bamboo leaf. It was full of spiritual energy, verdant and glistening. Throw it into the wine pot, and the price will soar. But this is the best wine we sell in our shop. For the second best wine, buy that big wine jar and put a few more bamboo leaves in it. I still have this. Chen Pinggan opened his palm. It was a liquor worm borrowed from Wei Pai. Talking about business would hurt their relationship. This liquor worm, even in the vast world, was considered a rare thing that could only be found by chance. Wei Pai had also held 3 gods' night touring banquets. In addition, he had hinted that a certain mountain and river god would reluctantly part with it. In addition, Wei Pai had hinted that this god could be absent from the 4th night touring banquet as compensation. Only then was he willing to offer a liquor worm as a tribute. Chen Pinggan said with confidence, I've tried it. Just the liquor worm alone is still not considered a good wine. Compared to the extremely expensive immortal wine, it's really a lot inferior. With the addition of bamboo leaves, the taste of the wine is like the difference between cloud and mud. So before our shop opens for business, we need to collect as much cheap and common wine as possible. The more the better. First, hoard it, and when we have enough, we'll open the door to welcome customers. If we buy our own wine, we probably won't be able to keep the price down. If we buy too much, it will arouse suspicion. So we can give Yang Zhuo and Chen Sancho some dividends. It's just a token of appreciation, but there's no need to give them too much. They have money, while we two don't. Ning Yarrow leaned against the door of the shop, looking at the guy who was particularly spirited when talking about business. Dui Zhong was a bit hesitant. She wasn't hesitant about whether or not to sell the wine. She already felt that there was no doubt about this matter. They could definitely make money. It was just a matter of how much they earned. Moreover, it would be the money of a rich sword immortal and sword cultivator. Dui Zhong didn't have the slightest bit of unease in her conscience. It didn't matter whose wine she drank. What truly made Dui Zhong hesitate was this matter. If she wanted to have a relationship with Fatty Yang and Chen Sancho, according to her original intentions, she would rather make less money and increase the cost than let her friends help her. If it weren't for Chen Pinggan mentioning that she could give them dividends, Dui Zhong would definitely have directly rejected this proposal. Chen Pinggan wasn't in a hurry. He put away the liquor worm into his sleeves and put away the bamboo leaves into things near hand. There was a large pile of bamboo leaves and bamboo branches, all of which had been brought to the Great Wall of Sword Chi. He smiled and said, "Miss Dui Zhong, I'll take the liberty to say something. Your business temperament really needs to be changed. Business is business. If you feel that it's a business that's unsure of profits and losses, it's best not to pull in friends. This is the right thing to do. But this is a business that's sure to be profitable and doesn't bring in friends. But it doesn't matter. If Miss Dui Zhong feels that it's really inappropriate, then we'll open a smaller wine shop. It's just that the cost is a bit higher. At the beginning, we'll stock up less wine and earn less money. Once we have a lot of money in our pockets, we can discuss this matter again. There's no need to worry at all." Dui Zhong seemed to have fallen into a new tangled situation. She was worried that if she refused the other party's genuine good intentions, Chen Pinggan would hold a grudge in his heart. Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, "Then we'll consider it a done deal." 370. Dui Zhong smiled and said, 50-50. Wine and a wine shop, both are indispensable. But Chen Pinggan said, "If I carry tables and chairs and casually set them up in an empty space on the street, wouldn't it also be a wine shop?" Dui Zhong said, "I don't believe that Ning Yaro can afford to lose face like this. Even if Ning Yaro doesn't care, can you, Chen Pinggan, really bear to do it?" Chen Pinggan was somewhat speechless. Ning Yaro was just about to speak. Dui Zhong hurriedly said, "Ning Yaro, we've been friends for so many years, you can't forget your friends just because you have a man." Ning Yaro originally wanted to say that she didn't even care about helping to sell wine, so why would she care about this? But since Dui Zhong had already said so, Ning Yaro couldn't bear to do it. So in the end, after bargaining, they saw a 40-60 split. The reason was that Chen Pinggan said that he had won 4 matches in a row, making this street famous. If he came to sell wine, it would be a golden signboard that didn't cost money, and would be able to attract more customers. Dui Zhong really somewhat admired this guy's money-making skills and shamelessness. But in the end, Dui Zhong still asked, "Chen Pinggan, do you really not mind selling wine and earning this trivial money? Will it damage the face of the Ning mansion and the Yarrow family's elders?" Chen Pinggan smiled and asked in reply, "Miss Dui Zhong, have you forgotten my background? I don't steal, I don't rob, I don't swindle, I only earn a copper coin. That's all my ability." Ning Yarrow suppressed a smile. She reckoned that this guy who only cared about money, once the shop opened and there was no market, and no one was willing to buy wine at first, he could sell his wine to the boss, the sword immortal. Dui Zhong was silent for a long time, then said in a small voice, "I think this wine shop of ours is quite deceptive." Chen Pinggan waved his hand, shamelessly boasting, "The price is written there, if you want to buy it or not. When the time comes, there will be no need to worry about sales. Whether we sell or not depends on our mood." Only then did Dui Zhong feel a little relieved. Earning enough money to buy a house had always been Dui Zhong's wish. But Dui Zhong also knew that as to how to earn money, he really wasn't good at it. Dui Zhong thought that after the negotiation, Chen Pinggan and Ning Yarrow would return to the Ning mansion, but he didn't think that Chen Pinggan would already be standing at the counter, taking the abacus. Dui Zhong doubtfully said, "Isn't it just buying wine and hoarding it? It's a very simple matter, I can still do it." Chen Pinggan's face was full of shock. This time he really wasn't pretending. He angrily laughed. "Is there such an easy business in this world? Miss Dui Zhong, I regret partnering up with you. Think about it, who do you want to buy wine with? You have to choose some deserted restaurant or wine shop, right? When the time comes, how do we bargain? How do we reduce the price if we buy too much? How do we talk to people? How do we talk to ghosts? How do we talk to people first? How do we fix the contract first, so that when our shop's business is good, the other party doesn't want to sell wine. Even if they don't sell, how do they compensate our shop according to the contract? If there are too many people, I don't think you can do it alone. There's no other way. I'll go back and cover the face. You just watch from the side, I'll show you first. What's more, these are just the rough details of buying wine from others. Moreover, when the shop opens, we'll first invite some passers-by to boost our reputation. What realm of sword cultivator are they? We'll have to secretly promise to give them a few pots of rare bamboo leaf wine for free. It'll be more appropriate to let a sword immortal be responsible for shouting that he wants to book the entire shop's wine. That way, we won't be able to leave any traces behind, unlike that shill who can't be calculative. After we earn money, how are we going to settle accounts with our drunkards like Fatty Yang and Chen Sancho? We're just a small business, so we definitely can't keep accounts. We'll have to have a plan early on. Dui Zhong's imposing manner was completely gone, and she became more and more guilty. Listening to Chen Ping'an's endless chatter across the counter, Dui Zhong began to wonder if she was really not suitable for doing business. Why did she suddenly feel that it was much more difficult than practicing swordsmanship? Ning Yarrow stood next to the counter with a smile on her face, eating melon seeds. So in the end, Dui Zhong timidly said, "Chen Ping'an, let's split it 30-70. You take 70 and I take 30. Chen Ping'an was just about to nod in agreement. But he was immediately elbowed by Ning Yarrow. Chen Ping'an immediately smiled and said, no need, we'll split it 50-50. We've already agreed, doing business still needs to be honest. Chen Ping'an turned sideways, throwing a meaningful glance at Dui Zhong. I talk about honesty, Miss Dui Zhong, you have to talk about sincerity. Why don't we both take a step back and split it 40-60? Dui Zhong nodded, then said to Ning Yarrow with an innocent expression, Ning Yarrow, Chen Ping'an is secretly winking at me. I don't know what he means. Chen Ping'an suffered another elbow. He grinned and gave Dui Zhong a thumbs up. Miss Dui Zhong, you're quite perceptive when it comes to doing business. They talked about many more details. Dui Zhong carefully noted them down. Chen Ping'an and Ning Yarrow left the small grocery store, walking along the edge of the main street. As they passed by the restaurants and taverns, Chen Ping'an smiled and said, in the future, we'll all be enemies in the same line of business. Ning Yarrow softly said, thanks. Chen Ping'an smiled and said, it's what I should do. Ning Yarrow hesitated for a moment, then said, Dui Zhong likes a gentleman of the Central Plains Academy. Can you talk some sense into her? Chen Ping'an bitterly smiled and said, there are some things I can help with, but this kind of thing, I really can't do it. Ning Yarrow clasped her hands behind her back, leisurely praising, don't you know a lot about love? Chen Ping'an resolutely said, in all honesty, what the hell do I know? Dui Zhong's small house hidden in a shabby alley was filled with large jars of wine. She didn't have enough capital. Chen Ping'an actually still had 10 grain rain coins as his personal savings, but he couldn't foolishly take out 1 grain rain coin to buy something. It would be easy for people to raise the price to death. So he asked Ning Yarrow for a pile of scattered snow coins. All the restaurants and shops that could buy cheap and inferior wine were all visited by Chen Ping'an and Dui Zhong. These wines wouldn't sell very well in the city streets of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. This was the strange part of the Great Wall of Sword Qi. Sword cultivators who could afford wine were not willing to drink these. Only those drunkards who couldn't pay off their debts would pinch their noses and drink these. But the real immortal wine in the big and small restaurants was really as expensive as flying swords, far higher than that of the inverted hanging mountain, which was only 1 door away. Even sword immortals would feel the pinch. Now that the inverted hanging mountain and the Great Wall of Sword Qi were strictly controlled, their days were getting more and more difficult. Chen Ping'an stooped down and opened a wine jar. The wine worm was soaking in it, leisurely like a small fish. It was drunk and knew how to enjoy itself. Each jar of wine had to be soaked in the wine worm for 3 days before it could be considered a good wine. There were a few bamboo leaves and a bamboo branch inside. It was not named bamboo leaf green, which was first suggested by Dui Zhong, or bamboo branch wine, which was suggested by Ning Yarrow. Instead, it was named Bamboo Sea Wonderland Wine by Chen Pinggan, which was also called Green Immortal Mountain Wine. Dui Zhong, who was used to making money from his conscience, was so shocked that he was stunned. At that time, Chen Pinggan spoke earnestly, saying that his bamboo leaves and branches were really produced by the Bamboo Sea Grotto. As for whether they were from the Azure Immortal Mountain, he would ask later when he had the chance. If they weren't, then he wouldn't mention the alias when selling the wine. Except for preparing to open a wine shop and sell wine to make money. Every day at the Ning mansion, Chen Pinggan still practiced qi for 12 hours, sometimes as long as 14 or 16 hours. Ning Yarrow gave up the pavilion on Dragon Beheading Cliff, and spent most of his time practicing swordsmanship on the martial arts practice field in the small mustard seed world. When Chen Pinggan was resting, he squatted at the foot of the hill with the sword immortal, concentrating on sharpening the edge of the sword. Occasionally, Fatty Yang, Dong Haitan, and the others would come over to sit for a while. Fatty Yang would seize the opportunity to make Chen Pinggan observe his crazy demon fist technique, and ask him if he was a martial arts prodigy that had been delayed by practicing swordsmanship. Of course, Chen Pinggan would nod and say yes. Every time he spoke, the words and reasons he gave were never the same. Chen Sancho felt that it was more unbearable than Fatty Yang's fist technique. Once, even Dong Haitan couldn't stand it anymore. Looking at the disgusting Fatty Yang on the martial arts practice field, he asked Chen Pinggan, "Are you telling the truth? Is Yang Zhuo really a martial arts prodigy?" Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Of course not." Only then did Dong Haitan feel a little better. After Chen Sancho heard this, he let out a long sigh, covered his forehead, and lay down on the bench. During this period, almost every day, a little girl with a sleeve full of pastries would come to the entrance of the Ning mansion, clamoring to be apprenticed to a master. Once, she was dragged into the mansion by Ning Yarrow and beaten up. With great difficulty, she finally had a day to rest, but unexpectedly, the little girl came again the next day. But this time, she was smarter. She would run away as soon as she was called. She would run back and forth several times a day, since she had nothing to do anyway. Then, she would block Ning Yarrow's way and drag her into the mansion by the ear. She would let the little girl admire Fatty Yang, who was practicing martial arts on the martial arts practice field. She said that this was the fist technique that Chen Pinggan had taught her. Did she still want to learn it? The little girl's eyes were brimming with tears, and her lips trembled. She said that even so, she still wanted to learn the fist technique. The little girl silently wiped her tears and choked with sobs. It turned out that this was the truth that her mother had said. Only those who suffered the most hardship would become the best. Ning Yarrow had no choice but to let Chen Pinggan personally go. At that time, Chen Pinggan was discussing a top priority with Bai Mama and Grandpa Nalan. Ning Yarrow didn't say anything, so Chen Pinggan had to follow them to the martial arts practice field in confusion. As a result, he saw the little girl who kowtowed to him as soon as she saw him. He wasn't unfamiliar with her. There were 4 fights on the street, and the little girl was the most noisy one. It was hard for him not to notice her. Chen Pinggan couldn't help a little girl casually, so he quickly moved away and said helplessly, "Don't kowtow first, what's your name?" The little girl quickly got up and said loudly, "Guizhuzhou." Chen Pinggan nodded, raised his left hand, pinched his fingers, and sighed, "Unfortunately, the name doesn't match, so I can't accept you as a disciple for the time being. We'll talk about it later." Guizhuzhou said sincerely, "Master, then I'll go back and ask my parents to help me change my name. I also don't think this name is good, so I've endured it for many years." Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "No, I accept disciples based on fate. For the first time, I look at the name first. If it doesn't work, then you have to wait for another 3 years. For the second time, I don't look at the name, but the time. You still have a chance at that time." Guizhuzhou was very annoyed. She stomped her feet heavily and ran away. She shouted that she wanted to look through the lunar calendar and choose an auspicious day for herself 3 years later. Yang Zhuzhou and Chen Sancho stood aside, and their eyes almost popped out. Guizhuzhou was a little weirdo. Her mind wasn't clear since she was a child. She was definitely not stupid. She was an excellent innate sword embryo and was praised as the future pillar of the Guo family. She couldn't be said to be smart. The little girl made a lot of jokes. She was simply the happy fruit of Chen Sanchio's street. When she was a child, she liked to run around blindly with a blanket draped over her. She never went through the main door and would just wander around on the roofs and walls. If it wasn't for the fact that she had been beaten by Dong Budu so many times and had a good memory, she would probably still be like this now. There were also rumors that the hidden official had actually chosen 2 candidates. Besides Pang Yuanji, it was Guo Zhujiu. Chen Pinggan obviously also didn't dare to believe it. That's possible. Chen Sanchio smiled bitterly. Whether it's possible or not, it probably depends on whether Guo Zhujiu comes tomorrow or not. Chen Pinggan looked at Ning Yaro. Ning Yaro said, "It's hard to say." Chen Pinggan didn't think much about it and continued to discuss with the 2 seniors. Regarding the matter of the Sword Immortal boss going to the Yarrow family to propose marriage as a matchmaker, Chen Pinggan naturally wouldn't urge him. In Chen Pinggan's room, Bai Mama asked with a smile, "What's the matter?" Chen Pinggan smiled, "It's still that little girl Guo Zhujiu. She wants to be apprenticed to a master and was fooled by me." Nailin Yeshing joked, "It's actually not bad to have another registered disciple for nothing." Chen Pinggan shook his head with a wry smile, "Such a big matter can't be taken lightly." Bai Mama said, "The Guo family and our Ning mansion have been friends for generations and have never broken off." Chen Pinggan froze for a moment and looked at Bai Mama's eyes with some questioning meaning. Bai Mama nodded, "It's the only one." After Master passed away, the entire Guo family came to the Ning mansion to pay their respects. Later on, the Guo family's head directly confronted the Sword Immortal Qi about the dragon beheading cliff incident. Otherwise, if it was another little girl who fooled around like this, our miss wouldn't have dragged her home twice. But the matter of accepting a disciple really doesn't need to be too serious. Chen Pinggan said in a deep voice, "Then about Guo Zhujiu, I will think about it seriously." Nailin Yeshing smiled, "These things are not urgent. Let's talk about young Master Chen's 4th natal item. Once the longevity bridge is built, young Master Chen will truly understand what cultivation is. After that, even if you are not an innate sword embryo, you can still barely become a sword cultivator. Don't underestimate the word barely. As a chi cultivator, the biggest difference between being a sword cultivator and not being a sword cultivator is the difference between heaven and earth. As for the reason, young Master Chen can privately ask Sword Immortal Boss." One morning, a shabby wine shop opened on the Great Wall of Sword Energy. The shopkeeper was the young one-armed female sword cultivator, Dui Zhong. Beside her stood the young man in blue. After personally setting off a string of noisy firecrackers, he smiled brightly and cupped his fists in all directions. If Dui Zhong wasn't the nominal shopkeeper of the wine shop, there would be no turning back. She had spent all her capital. In fact, she also wanted to stay in the shop and pretend that this wine shop had nothing to do with her. Tables and stools were placed in front of the 2 of them. Ning Yaro, Yang Zhuo, and the others hid in the store filled with large and small wine jars and jugs. Even someone as thick-skinned as Fatty Yang and someone as shameless as Dong Haitan didn't have the face to walk out of the store. On the main street, the road had just been repaired. The shopkeepers and waiters of wine shops of all sizes stood at their respective doors, cursing and swearing. Outside the door of the shabby little shop hung a couplet. It was said that the young martial artist had personally written it. The Sword Immortal's 3-foot sword looks around in a daze. Where is the enemy? The hero is lonely. 2 tales of wine in a cup, with you we can share the sorrow of eternity. Once drunk, what is money? Good fellow, you pure martial artist Chen Pinggan, can't you, a foreigner, have some face? That's nothing. I heard that this little shop sells wine that has something to do with the Bamboo Sea Paradise and the Azure Immortal Mountain. What is money? If it really isn't anything, why the hell are you opening a shop to earn money? Whistles rang out on both sides of the street. In the end, Dui Zhong was thin-skinned. His forehead was already dripping with sweat and his face was tense. He tried his best not to show his fear, but he couldn't help but ask softly, "Chen Pinggan, can we really sell half a jar of wine?" Chen Pinggan smiled, "Even if no one really supports us, We'll still have nothing to worry about, and we won't have to worry about making money if we follow my established rules. Before that, if someone comes to buy wine, that's even better. It's normal for there to be fewer customers so early in the morning. After the time it took for a stick of incense to burn, there was still no customer. Di Zhong became more and more worried. Chen Pinggan yelled at the top of his lungs, "Open the door, 1 jar, 50% off. There's only 1 jar, first come, first served." And then someone really did come. Di Zhong asked doubtfully, "Is he also someone you invited?" Chen Pinggan was also a little surprised. He shook his head, "Of course not. The person who came was Pang Yuanji." He sat on a bench and said with a smile, "Give me the cheapest jar. Don't forget to give me another 50% off." Chen Pinggan turned his head to look at the dumbfounded Di Zhong and laughed softly. "What are you staring at? The head shopkeeper is personally bringing the wine to the table." Di Zhong hurriedly took a jar of Bamboo Sea Paradise wine and a large white bowl, placing them on the table in front of Pang Yuanji. She helped unseal the jar of wine that hadn't been used for many days and poured a bowl of wine for Pang Yuanji. She really felt that her conscience wasn't at ease. She squeezed out a smile and said in a voice as small as a mosquito, "Dear customer, please enjoy." Then Chen Pinggan took an extra bowl and sat at Pang Yuanji's table. He picked up the jar and poured a bowl of wine for himself, saying with a smile, "Brother Yuanji, thank you for your support. I must give you a toast." With Brother Yuanji's magnanimity as a prime minister, there's no escaping the title of Sword Immortal. "I'll drink first as a sign of respect." Di Zhong wanted nothing more than to dig a hole and crawl into it. What kind of wine seller would freeload off his own customers' wine? Pang Yuanji waited for Chen Pinggan to finish drinking before pouring another bowl of wine for Chen Pinggan. However, it wasn't full. It was only a small jar of wine. How many bowls could he drink? Fortunately, the white bowl carefully chosen by this shop wasn't big, so the amount of wine seemed to be sufficient. Pang Yuanji somewhat regretted coming here. It would be fine if business was slow in the future, but if there were more people drinking, he would be cursed to death. Holding the bowl in his hand, he lowered his head and sniffed. It really did have the taste of immortal wine. It was better than he had imagined. However, this jar of wine was only sold for 1 snow coin. Wasn't the price a little too low? This kind of taste would be at least a few snow coins in other restaurants at the Great Wall of Sword Chi. Pang Yuanji only knew one thing. Not to mention his own Great Wall of Sword Chi, there were no wine sellers in the world that would lose money. Chen Pinggan and Pang Yuanji clinked their bowls together and drank their wine in one gulp. Then, Chen Pinggan brought out a jar of wine and placed it on the table. He smiled and said, "Half price, 2 jars of wine. I'll only charge Brother Yuanji 1 snow coin." Pang Yuanji drank the wine in his bowl. The taste of the wine was not bad, so he endured it. Pang Yuanji drank a jar of wine and picked up the jar of wine that was almost helped open by Chen Pinggan. He slapped down a snow coin and got up to leave, saying that he would come back next time. Di Zhong wiped her forehead and took the snow coin from Chen Pinggan's hand. She smiled brightly. Then, about an hour later, when Di Zhong began to worry about the shop's money again, she saw another customer who landed on the wind. She couldn't help but turn to look at Chen Pinggan. She realized that after Chen Pinggan said, "It was an accident," he was actually a little nervous. The visitor was the Sword Immortal of Snow Wind Temple, Wei Jin, who came from the Aquarius continent like Chen Pinggan. Wei Jin ordered the most expensive jar of wine, 5 snow coins for a small jar, and there was a bamboo leaf in the jar. Wei Jin didn't rush to drink the wine. He asked with a smile, "How is she?" Chen Pinggan felt like he was sitting on pins and needles, but he couldn't pretend to be stupid. After all, the other party was Wei Jin. He could only smile bitterly and say, "She should be very good. Now she has become the master of a sect, but I was almost killed by her in the Ghost Valley. Wei Jin, are you here to make a scene?" Chen Pinggan didn't hide anything from Ning Yaro about He Xiaoyong, the first female Taoist nun of the Divine Warning sect and later the sect master of the Qingliang sect. He told her everything. Fortunately, Ning Yaro didn't show any anger. She only said that He Xiaoyong had gone too far and that he should meet her in the future. But today, Wei Jin touched the sore spot. Chen Pinggan still felt a chill down his spine. He always felt that the shop was full of sword qi. Wei Jin drank a bowl of wine and asked again, "Does she really like you?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "I'm not sure." Wei Jin nodded and poured another bowl of wine. After drinking it in one gulp, he said with a smile, "Shopkeeper, you can go on with your business. You don't have to entertain the guests." In the end, Wei Jin sat there alone. He drank a little slower, but he didn't stop. Most infatuated men in the world liked to drink the heartbreaking wine. The person who really cut their intestines with a knife was always the lover who wasn't beside the wine bowl. Chen Pinggan squatted at the door with his back to the shop. It was rare for him to earn money, but he couldn't smile. Instead, he was very worried. Because when Wei Jin drank the third bowl of wine, he bid for a small summer coin. He said that if he came to drink in the future, he would deduct the money from this small summer coin. Fatty Yang and Chen Sanchio were very tactful and didn't say a word. But that dumbfounded Dong Hei Tan stupidly said, "I think there's a story behind this." Chen Pinggan finally understood why Fatty Yang and Chen Sanchio were sometimes so afraid of Dong Hetan opening his mouth to speak. Every word was like a flying sword, it could really stab someone to death. Before Wei Jin could get up and scram, Chen Pinggan hurriedly got up as if he had been granted amnesty. It turned out that the little girl, Guozhujiu, had dragged a few of her peers over to support them. Guozhujiu went straight to the point and told Chen Pinggan directly that she was hiding something. She respectfully addressed Chen Pinggan as Shifu in 3 years and continued, "My friends and I just found out that a wine shop has opened here. That's why we came here to buy some wine to show our filial respect to our parents and elders. Shifu in 3 years, it's really not that I wanted to drag them here." Then Guozhujiu gave them a meaningful look. The little girls, who had been specially knocked on their doors by Guozhujiu last night to remind them not to forget about this matter, were all listless. They paid for the wine and obediently held the wine, then waited for Guozhujiu to give orders. They really didn't care about earning those 3 snowflakes from Guozhujiu. This had annoyed Guozhujiu for many days. Some people wanted to directly give Guozhujiu 6 snowflakes, but she didn't accept them and insisted on making up the numbers. In the end, Guozhujiu also took out 3 snowflakes and bought a pot of wine. She explained, "Shifu in 3 years, they're all paying out of their own pocket." Chen Pinggan said seriously, "I've calculated on my fingers. 3 years is halved. After a year and a half, we can see if it's suitable to accept disciples." Guozhujiu held the pot in one hand and clenched her fist with the other. She waved it vigorously and said in high spirits, "Today is indeed a good day to buy wine. I really didn't memorize that old almanac for nothing." With Pang Yuanji and Wei Jin, as well as these little girls supporting them one after another, the wine shop had business. From the looks of it, it wouldn't be difficult to break even. This was already enough to make Di Zhong overjoyed. Di Zhong gradually became busy. As for the matter of selling wine, it was agreed in advance that Di Zhong had to put in more effort. Chen Pinggan couldn't keep an eye on this place every day. The inexplicable Dong Haitan had already been led away by Chen Sanchio and Fatty Yang. Ning Yarrow leaned against the counter inside the shop, eating melon seeds and looking at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan asked tentatively, "You're not angry, are you?" Ning Yarrow said, "How is that possible?" Chen Pinggan said with a sad face, "How is it possible that you're not angry? Or how is it possible that you're not angry?" Ning Yarrow blinked and said, "Guess." Chen Pinggan sighed, "I'll open a pot of wine myself. Put it on the bill." Ning Yarrow suddenly laughed and said, "He Xiaoliong is nothing. Is he worth my anger?" Chen Pinggan stood in front of her and asked softly, "Do you know why I'm not depressed at all after losing 3 rounds to Cao Ci?" Ning Yarrow asked, "Why?" Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "Because Ning Yarrow doesn't even bother to remember who Cao Ci is." Then Chen Pinggan also leaned against the counter and looked at the drinkers at the table outside. "After seeing you, that poor kid who grew up in Mud Bottle Alley has never been short of money." Ning Yarrow looked at his smiling face, which was becoming more and more obvious. She stopped eating melon seeds and asked, "Are you laughing at me for being stupid now?" Chen Pinggan immediately stopped smiling, and then immediately realized that he was not the least bit smarter than the little girl. He was also exposing himself here. However, Ning Yaro stretched out her hand and Chen Pinggan grabbed some melon seeds. Ning Yaro said while eating melon seeds, "I'm not angry that so many women like you." After a pause, Ning Yaro said, "But if one day you like a woman other than me, I will be very sad. If that day really comes, you don't have to say sorry to me, and you don't have to see me and tell me this kind of thing in person. I don't want to hear it." Chen Pinggan reached out and pressed Ning Yaro's head, gently shaking it. "Don't let your imagination run wild. It will be very difficult for me to become a person with a high cultivation in this life. There is always a mountain higher than a mountain, and I can only work hard to fulfill the promise step by step. But Chen Pinggan is definitely the person who likes Ning Yaro the most in the world, so this matter doesn't need to work hard." The wine shop's business was getting better and better. That Chen Pinggan, on the other hand, became a shopkeeper who did nothing. Every time he came to the shop, he actually chatted with the group of little kids, holding a small stool and borrowing the children's comic books to read. Occasionally, Chen Pinggan would also teach them how to read. Later, that young man in green robes didn't want to earn money. He put aside the dragon beheading platform of the Ning mansion and didn't seize the opportunity to refine his spiritual energy. He ran to the streets and alleys to make stone tablets and collected a large pile of paper. Then, he often sat under the sun and told stories of mountains, rivers, and ghosts with a group of children. He became a storyteller. Later, when some children asked him about a language he didn't know, the young man took out a bamboo stick and wrote on the ground. He only explained the words and didn't say anything else. Even when the children asked more, the young man just smiled and shook his head. After teaching them the words, he talked about the strange things in his hometown and the mountains and rivers he saw. One day, the young man in green robes with a jade hairpin in his hair basked in the warm sunshine of a foreign land. After teaching some words and telling some stories, he put the bamboo stick on his knees and softly recited, "The sun shines brightly, the lamb's coat is wet." Seeing that the man stopped, a child asked curiously, "And then? Is there anything else?" The man put his hands on his knees and looked forward, slowly saying, "At the time of the awakening of insects, the world is born and all things begin to flourish. Sleeping at night and getting up early, walking widely in the courtyard, a gentleman walks slowly so that he can develop his will." The children around the bench and the man didn't understand what he was saying, but they were willing to quietly listen to the man reciting softly. In the remote alleys of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, it was like there was an additional primary school without a real teacher or real children. 583. Compared to the past, the Ning mansion was not as lively as it used to be, except for the addition of Chen Pinggan. The reason for the silence in the Ning mansion was too heavy. Originally, after the birth of Ning Yaro, the Ning mansion had the opportunity to become a top family like the Dong, Qi, and Chen families. Now, they were all gone, but there was still a haze that lingered. On the other hand, the old sword deity Dong Sangeng personally came out to serve the homecoming wine of the Taihui sword sect's sword deity Huang Tong. There were a total of 6 sword deities sharing a table and drinking wine. With the arrival of 3 sword deities carving words on the no matter plate, the small wine shop's business, which was about to go downhill, suddenly flourished after one night. There were many sword deities squatting and drinking wine. At the same time, the wine shop introduced the Yang's restaurant's unique pickles. Every time someone bought a bottle of wine, they would get a free plate. Together with the slightly bland bamboo grotto heaven wine, one could slurp the wine and crunch the pickles. The taste was excellent. Chen Pinggan's daily life in the Ning mansion was very regular. Apart from the 12 hours of refining qi in the pavilion on the dragon-slaying cliff, he usually spent an hour sweeping the courtyard with Grandma Bai in the early morning. During this time, he asked about the details of the practice in detail, and Li on the Lion Peak helped to feed him. However, different peak grandmasters explained the theory of the fist. Often, they were fundamentally similar, and their paths were different. The old woman would often talk about the details, and then she would practice the moves herself. Chen Pinggan followed suit. The old woman was actually very pleased, because Chen Pinggan had already used her fist in the fight on the street. Bai Lianshuang's fist art was the opposite of most of the fist intent in the world. It focused on withdrawing the fist and restraining the spirit. When it reached a perfect state, only then would it talk about punching the enemy. Every day at noon, he and Nailan Yeshing would familiarize themselves with the flying sword of a Jade Realm sword practitioner in the mustard small world. It would take about an hour. At midnight, there would be another practice. This was Nailan Yeshing's request. If he wanted to learn the essence of his two different sword intents, these 4 hours were the best time. Learning swordsmanship from Nailan Yeshing was not as bad as learning martial arts from Bai Momo. He would often get injured. In fact, Nailan Yeshing had a sense of propriety when it came to swordsmanship. Chen Pinggan's wounds were all minor, but Bai Momo felt distressed every time. Once, Chen Pinggan was slightly injured. After practicing swordsmanship at midnight, they drank 2 cups of wine with Grandpa Nailan according to the old rules. As a result, Bai Momo scolded Nailan Yeshing. Nailan Yeshing just reached out his hand to cover his wine cup, not daring to talk back. Actually, Chen Pinggan and Ning Yarrow had talked about sword practice before, hoping that Grandma Bai would not worry about it. But for some reason, the old woman, who could be said to be well-educated and reasonable, was unreasonable on this matter. The one who suffered was Nailan Yeshing. Later, when she heard that Chen Pinggan's bottleneck had loosened and showed signs of breaking through, the old woman endured her heartache and reluctantly let go of Chen Pinggan, who had no merit but only worked hard. Chen Pinggan had privately asked Ning Yarrow about Alliance's modification of the 18 stops. Why did he only teach so many people? Ning Yarrow's expression was solemn. She said that it was not that Alliance did not want to teach more people, but that he did not dare to. Chen Pinggan was sitting in the pavilion at that time. He woke up with a start and broke out in cold sweat for the first time. If he taught enough, all the young demon sword practitioners in the desolate world would be able to reach a higher level in the way of the sword. Ning Yarrow looked at Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan said, "Up until now, the only person I have taught is Pei Qian." Ning Yarrow nodded. "Then it's fine." After that, Chen Pinggan asked the city if there were any other sword immortals' writings in the city other than the 2 engraved books. Regardless of whether they were written by local or foreign sword immortals, whether they were written about the battles at the Great Wall of Sword Chi, or travel notes about the mountains and rivers of the wilderness, they were all available. Ning Yarrow said that the Ning Mansion did not have many of these miscellaneous books. Most of the books in the library were from the 100 schools of thought. But they could try their luck at the Mirage in the northern part of the city. Chen Pinggan hesitated. That market was very strange. Its foundation was a mirage in name only, but it did not dissipate after a long time. It was magnificent, like the residence of an immortal. There were more than 40 buildings of various colors and it could accommodate thousands of people. The city itself was heavily guarded. For outsiders, it was not easy to enter and leave. Hence, the vast world's merchants who had long been trading with the Great Wall of Sword Chi were all doing business there. They had all sorts of items, antiques, treasures, and heavy weapons. Every 100 years, the Mirage Tower would turn illusory. The cultivators who lived there would have to leave once. They would have to wait for the Mirage Tower to materialize again before moving in. Ning Yarrow had once encountered an assassination attempt there. Grandma Bai had also fallen from the 10th realm to the peak realm there. A pure martial artist was not a common Qi refinement warrior. From this, one could see how dangerous and tragic the assassination attempt was. Chen Pinggan did not agree to go there with Ning Yarrow. He only wanted to get people to help him collect books and spend money. Otherwise, what was the point of earning money? If one did not use all means to kill, one could only talk about the speed of cultivation. Even if Chen Pinggan did not compare himself to Ning Yarrow and only compared himself to Stack Cliff Chen Sanchio and the others, he would still feel inferior. Once, Yangs was said that he would pass on the skills of his master to the little girl Guozhujiu. Chen Pinggan squatted at the side, ignoring the nonsense of the adult and the child. He only raised his head and glanced at Chen Sanchio and Dong Huafu who were practicing Qi in the pavilion. With the longevity bridge as the bridge between the big and small worlds, The flow of aura was so fast that it was too much for the eyes to take in. Chen Pinggan felt a little worried when he looked at it. He always felt that he was not worthy of the feng shui treasure land of the dragon beheading cliff. Ning Yarrow stood at the side and comforted him. Your longevity bridge has not been completed yet. They are both golden core cultivators, so you will feel the difference. When you gather 5 natal items, the 5 elements will complement each other. Now, you have 3 natal items, the water word seal, the soil of the Aquarius continent, and the wood embryo statue. These 3 items are of good quality and already have the embryonic form of a small world. Even in the Great Wall of Sword Chi, most of the Earth Immortal sword cultivators do not have such a complicated elixir room. Chen Pinggan said with a smile, a sword cultivator just needs a good intrinsic sword. There's no need for so many intrinsic items to support it. Ning Yarrow said, aren't I just saying some words of comfort to you? Chen Pinggan smiled, I appreciate it. Chen Pinggan remembered something. Stack Cliff is busy with the shop business every day. Will it really not affect her cultivation? Ning Yarrow shook her head, it won't. Other than entering the cave-dwelling realm in the lower 5 realms and entering the Golden Core realm, both of which were in the Ning residence, Stack Cliff has relied on herself for the rest of her breakthroughs. Every time she experiences a battle, Stack Cliff will be able to break through very quickly. She is a genius born for large-scale battles. Last time when she sparred with Dong Huafu, you did not see everything. When you are on the battlefield and fight side by side with Stack Cliff, you will understand why Stack Cliff is Chen Sanchio's best friend. Other than me, every time Chen Sanchio finishes a battle, he will ask Fatty Yang and Dong Haitan if they saw the back of Stack Cliff's head clearly and if she is beautiful. Ning Yarrow said, therefore, the elders of the Dong and Chen clans have always looked at Stack Cliff in a different light. Especially the Chen clan, they even wanted to let a young talent marry Stack Cliff. Chen Sanchio's elder brother nodded in agreement, but Stack Cliff did not agree. Grandpa Dong is willing to send off the Taihui sword sect's sword Immortal Huang Tong at Stack Cliff's shop. This has nothing to do with you. It is only because Stack Cliff saved Dong Haitan's life. Stack Cliff once said, if I must die, there is no need to save me. Grandpa Dong especially admires this saying. Ning Yarrow smiled and said, I did not tell Stack Cliff too much about these things. She is meticulous and will always overthink things. I am afraid that she will be distracted. She admires those sword immortals too much. Going too far is as bad as falling short. You should have noticed at the shop that whether it is Zhuozhuo, Grandpa Dong, or Han Huizi and Hu Cai, when Stack Cliff sees them, they will all be very nervous. Chen Pinggan nodded. I did notice. If you agree, I can talk to her later. I have more experience in this matter. Ning Yarrow stared at Chen Pinggan and asked, why not? Or do you think I am unreasonable? Chen Pinggan stretched out his hands and pinched Ning Yarrow's cheeks. How is that possible? Fatty Yang, who had been watching and listening to all directions, was careless and was kicked in the face by the little girl who had learned his martial arts. Yang's didn't notice and winked at Guozhujiu. The little girl turned her head and took a look. She gasped. Her master was so bold. It was true that the skilled were bold. She was also very smart and lucky. This time, she was learning from her master. It was a sure win. Ning Yarrow stood still and let that guy pinch her cheeks. Since you are so skilled, why don't we go to the mustard seed world to practice with you? Chen Pinggan quickly stopped, but with one hand behind his back, he opened his palm and extended it to the martial arts arena. He smiled and said, please. Ning Yarrow raised her eyebrows and swept into the mustard seed world near the south of the martial arts arena. She stood still and gently twisted her wrist. Chen Pinggan ran away and disappeared. Ning Yarrow did not chase after him. She just took out her flying sword and strolled in the mustard seed world. It was not even sword practice. It was just that she had not let her flying sword see the world for a long time. The matter of cultivation was not worth mentioning to Ning Yarrow. Guozhujiu said in a daze, judging the situation and being able to adapt. My master is really a man. Yangs were asked, Lu Duan, I will teach you the fist technique and you will teach me the art of flattery. How about that? The little girl imitated the green-robed swordsman master. Before the battle on the street, she posed with one hand clenched in front of her and the other hand behind her back. She shook her head and said, "Your heart is not sincere and your aptitude is even worse." Yang Zhuo was a little confused. Ning Yaro waved her hand and said, "Lu Duan, come here and take a beating." Guo Zhujiu shouted and then began to run. She was a sword cultivator of the middle 5 states. It was not difficult for her to escape by riding the wind. She was just not as smooth as her future master. The disciple was not as good as her master. There was no need to be ashamed. Unfortunately, Ning Yaro reached out and grabbed Guo Zhujiu. A fine sword aura wrapped around Guo Zhujiu and pulled her to her side. Guo Zhujiu staggered and stood still. She shouted softly and put her palms together. Then, she intertwined her fingers and made a gesture. "Spirit of the sky and spirit of the earth. Sister Ning can't see and it won't hurt even if I hit her." Yang Zhuo covered his face with both hands and rubbed it hard. He said to himself, "If you want me to take a disciple like Lu Duan, I would rather take her as my master." If Guo Zhujiu thought that she could escape with this, she was underestimating Ning Yao too much. The little girl left the Ning residence with a bloody nose and a swollen face. She bounced around and asked elder sister Ning if she wanted to eat some pastries. She also patted her chest and promised that she had tripped and fallen because she was careless. In the end, elder sister Ning grabbed her little head and knocked on the door. Guo Zhujiu, who was a little dizzy, left the holy ground of martial arts by herself. She walked pitifully on the streets. She touched her face, and her hand was full of nosebleeds. She casually wiped the blood on her body. The little girl raised her head high and slowly walked forward. She thought that practicing martial arts was really not easy, but this was a good thing. How could there be a peerless fist technique that could be learned so easily? Once she learned 70 to 80% of the skill, she could forget about Sister Ning. Master's wife was the most important and Master might not be willing to favor her. She could just endure it. But Dong Bude was an old girl who couldn't get married. She would have to take it easy when walking at night. The little girl, who had a jade-green inkstone hanging from her waist, had been looking up at the cloudless blue sky. She nodded gently. Today was a good day. On this day, Chen Pinggan and Ning Yaro went for a stroll to the wine shop in Stack Cliff. In the past, when the two of them were refining energy, they each had their own time to rest. They didn't always go together. Often, Chen Pinggan would go to Stack Cliff alone. Today, Ning Yaro had clearly interrupted her cultivation and wanted to walk with Chen Pinggan. Chen Pinggan didn't think too much about it. When they passed by the wine shop on the main street, whose business was far less prosperous than his shop, Chen Pinggan looked at the large and small horizontal couplets and whispered to Ning Yaro, "Your handwriting is not as good as mine, and the meaning is far worse, right?" Ning Yaro said, "There is a big restaurant that invited a registered disciple of the scholarly sage. He is a gentleman from the academy and wrote the horizontal couplets himself." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "This is a clumsy business that has only learned a little. It won't succeed. I bet that if the restaurant's business doesn't get worse, the shopkeeper will be thanking the gods. Don't expect the customers to appreciate it. There are more than 70 big and small wine shops here. Everyone sells wine. There are more than 100 kinds of immortal wine in the world. It's not difficult to drink any kind of wine. But in the end, what are they selling?" Ning Yaro asked, "What is it?" Chen Pinggan smiled and didn't speak. He continued to look around at the content of the couplets that seemed to be shy and blushing. Ning Yaro said, "Forget it if you don't want to say." Chen Pinggan hurriedly said, "Of course it's for those who buy wine. Those who drink my wine are either sword immortals or sword immortals who are better than sword immortals. In a small shop, there are crude tables and stools, but there are no restrictions. The small wine cup is big." So Stack Jong said that if he made money, he would have to change the tables and stools. He would have to learn from those big restaurants and make them new and shiny. This is absolutely impossible. Fatty Yang suggested that he use his private money to join us. He took out a large silk shop under his name that was not doing well, but I directly rejected him. First of all, it would ruin the feng shui and ruin the unique style of the wine shop. Second of all, our city is not small. There are tens of thousands of people, including half of his women. How can we not sell silk and satin? So I plan to talk to Fatty Yang and tell him not to add money to join our shop. We will pay to join his silk shop. Here, the only people who are willing to pay are the sword cultivators who like to drink and the women who like to dress up for their lovers. I already have a draft for the silk shop's new couplet. Ning Yarrow slowly said, Alliance said that men who practice the sword can become sword immortals based on talent alone. But if you want to become a good and considerate man like him, you have to suffer the pain of a woman's words piercing your heart like flying swords. You have to endure the pain of a woman leaving and never looking back. You have to drink thousands of pounds of wine that yearns for your soul. Chen Pingan turned to look at Ning Yarrow and blinked. You're right. For the past 10 years, I've been thinking about someone. Even though we're far away from home, the flying swords of immortals can't reach us. I can only practice martial arts and drink wine to ease my sorrows. In the next moment, Chen Pingan suddenly panicked. Ning Yarrow's face was somewhat undisguised gloomy. That pair of eyes seemed to want to say something. She was not good with words, so she never said anything. Because she never knew how to say words of love. In the past, the youth in straw sandals who took 1 million to reach the inverted hanging mountain was also as clumsy with words as he was. Therefore, she did not think much of it. It was as if it was how it should be. You don't say anything and I don't say anything, then you'll know. Chen Pingan extended a thumb and gently stroked Ning Yarrow's eyebrows. He said softly, don't be unhappy. You have to relax your frown. Ning Yarrow said, I'm just unhappy. Chen Pingan bent down, picked up Ning Yarrow, and began running. Ning Yarrow was at a loss. Chen Pingan carried her and ran all the way to Stacked Cliff Wine Shop. There were dozens of sword cultivators at the table and squatting at the side. All of them were dumbfounded. Among them, there were many young women. Most of them were daughters of influential families who came because of its reputation. Seeing this scene, they did not think much of it. Instead, their eyes shone brightly. There were even some bold women who took a big gulp of wine and whistled skillfully. Chen Pingan put Ning Yarrow down and waved his hand. 10% off for all the drinks that have not been paid. Then Chen Pingan added, the words of the second shopkeeper may not be effective. Head shopkeeper Stacked Cliff's words are final. The drinkers looked at Stacked Cliff in unison. Stacked Cliff smiled and nodded. 10% off then. Immediately, there were cheers. Damn it. It was not easy to save money on drinks from this second shopkeeper. Chen Pingan picked up a small stool and was about to go to the corner of the street to be a storyteller again. He looked at Ning Yarrow. Ning Yarrow nodded. Stacked Cliff came to Ning Yarrow's side and asked softly, what's wrong today? Chen Pingan was not like this in the past. Looking at his posture, in a few days, he'll be playing gongs and drums on the streets. Ning Yarrow glanced at the chattering girls at a table in the distance. She smiled but did not say anything. Stacked Cliff held back his laughter. Ning Yarrow had secretly mentioned that there were women who came to the shop to drink. Their ulterior motives were not in the wine. Naturally, they came for the famous second shopkeeper. There were 2 shameless people. Not only did they buy the wine, but they also carved their names and words on the back of the nameplate on the wall of the wine shop. If it wasn't for the shopkeeper of the wine shop, he would have taken down the nameplate. Previously, Ning Yarrow had flipped open the nameplate and glanced at it. Then, she quietly flipped it back. Chen Pingan sat on a small stool. Soon, he was surrounded by a large group of children. Like before, he told the story of the mountain and river gods that he had not finished last time. He stopped at the crucial point and smiled as he said, let's wait for the next round. There were complaints all around him. The child who wanted to learn martial arts from Chen Pingan even earlier than Guozhujiu squatted by Chen Pingan's feet and took out a copper coin from a clay jar. Chen Pingan, continue. There's a reward. If it's not enough, I can add more money. Chen Pingan pushed the child's head away. Go away. Then, Chen Pingan took out a piece of paper from the tablet rubbing and gently unfolded it. Are there any words you don't know on this? Is there anything you want to learn? A teenager said sullenly, there are so many words I don't know. What's the use of learning these? It's so boring. I don't want to listen to this. Continue the story or I'm leaving. Chen Pinggan looked around. More or less everyone was the same. He was not interested in children who grew up in the shabby alleys. Once the novelty wore off, it would be hard for them to last. Literacy was not useless in the Great Wall of Sword Chi. It was useful for those lucky ones who could become sword cultivators. But in the poor families on the streets and alleys, it was just something to relieve boredom. If it wasn't for the fact that they wanted to know what the characters in the picture books said, everyone would have thought that it had nothing to do with those crooked words on the stone tablets. From childhood to old age until death, the two sides didn't know each other, and they didn't know each other. Chen Pinggan smiled and said, there's no hurry. I'll only explain one word to you today. After that, I'll continue the story. Chen Pinggan picked up the bamboo branch on his knee and wrote a word on the ground. Steady. Chen Pinggan smiled and asked, does anyone know it? Someone said. Then, Chen Pinggan raised the verdant bamboo branch in his hand. It was faintly lingering with spiritual energy. He said, I'll give this bamboo branch to whoever can help me solve the word today. Of course, you have to solve it well. For example, at the very least, you have to tell me why the word steady has the word urgent when it clearly means unhurried. Isn't that contradictory? Could it be that when the saint created the word, he dozed off and made up this word for us in a daze? The large group of children stared at each other helplessly. It was already very impressive to be able to recognize the word steady. Who would know this? A little girl hiding sneakily among the crowd whispered, Future Master, I know what it means. Chen Pinggan shook his head and smiled. No, you've been studying since you were young. It's unfair to others if you solve the word. Guozhujiu was a little envious of the bamboo branch in her master's hand. If she got it and returned to her home street, wouldn't she be able to show off? The little girl was a little annoyed. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have studied. When the crowd noticed Guozhujiu, they intentionally moved away and distanced themselves from her. It wasn't just fear and envy. There was also inferiority, as well as the self-esteem that often coexisted with inferiority. The little girl squatting alone didn't feel anything. The small inkstone hanging from her waist didn't even matter if it touched the mud. A poor boy with delicate features but with mended clothes gathered his courage. His face was slightly red as he pointed at the word on the ground in front of Chen Pinggan. His voice trembled as he said softly, haste is steadiness. Haste is actually a fast but slow seedling. There's a small stone tablet in my home's Lingxi alley. There's a saying on it, rice and weeds gather, rich and powerful emperors and marquises. I've asked Sister Dai Zhong about it. She knows what it means, but Sister Dai Zhong said that she's actually never seen any rice and weeds. I feel that the word stable has the meaning of using resources as the foundation and urgency as the expression. It's just like the new wine shop that you and Sister Dai Zhong opened. It earns money quickly, but it spends money slowly. With enough money, Sister Dai Zhong can buy a bigger house. Chen Pinggan had long noticed this boy. He was the one who listened to stories and explained words the most seriously. The boy was also one of the craftsman's apprentices who had renovated the street. However, Chen Pinggan discovered that the boy's physique was weak. Not only had he lost the best opportunity to practice boxing, he was also congenitally unsuited for martial arts. This was different from Zhao Shuxia. It wasn't that he couldn't learn boxing, but it was very difficult to achieve anything. At the very least, he wouldn't be able to endure the pain of the third realm. Chen Pinggan still didn't give up. After asking Ning Yaro looked at the boy from afar and shook her head. She said that the boy didn't have the aptitude to practice the sword. He couldn't even take the first step. If this didn't work, then everything else was over. Only then did Chen Pinggan give up. Perhaps it wasn't that the boy was truly literate. It was just that he had been lonely since he was young and had nothing to do. He had to do something. If he could make himself slightly different from his peers without spending money, then the poor boy would be especially attentive. Chen Pinggan smiled and nodded. Zhong Jiazhen, You solved half of the word steadiness, so I'll give you the bamboo branch. Chen Pinggan handed over the bamboo branch. The boy, who didn't expect Chen Pinggan to know his name, turned completely red. He panicked and shook his head vigorously. I don't want this. Chen Pinggan took back the bamboo branch and asked with a smile, why? Do you want to learn boxing? Zhong Jiazhen still shook her head. It'll delay my long-term work. Chen Pinggan said with a smile, having a true skill is the most important thing to have a foothold in life. Otherwise, it'll be difficult to live a good life. When the time comes, you'll blame the heavens and accuse others. You'll be right in everything. You'll feel bad even if you're good. The boy seemed to understand but didn't. Even if he was the most literate among his peers in the nearby streets, how could he know about true knowledge? But Chen Pinggan's words weren't the truth of a sage. They were just superficial family matters. Zhong Jiazhen could still understand some of it. For example, Chen Pinggan would approve of his long-term work to earn money and support himself. This made the boy feel much more at ease. To be recognized, even if it was small. For a boy like Zhong Jiazhen, it might not be a small matter. The little brat holding the clay pot shouted, I don't want to be a bricklayer. Useless. Even if I get a wife, I won't look good. Chen Pinggan reached out and pressed the child's head beside him. He shook it gently. You're ambitious, okay? When you get home, ask your father if your mother is pretty or not. If you dare to ask, with this heroic spirit, I'll tell you a supernatural story alone. This deal, do you want to do it? Am I itching for a beating? You often tell stories, and I can't run away. But when my mother gets angry, my father will only let me take the beating. The child raised the clay pot and said angrily, Chen Pinggan, are you going to teach me fist techniques or not? If you don't earn money, are you a fool? Chen Pinggan smiled and said, after I finish the second half of the story, I'll teach you a set of basic fist techniques. Everyone can learn it. But I'll say it first, this fist technique is very boring. Even if you learn it, you'll definitely be useless. At most, you won't feel cold when it snows in winter. The child said, oh. He felt that it was fine. It would be a waste not to learn it. So he hugged the clay pot tightly. Chen Pinggan laughed and said to the child, why aren't you giving me the money jar? The child asked, cheating a child's money, Chen Pinggan, aren't you embarrassed? An expert like you is really embarrassing. I don't want to learn fist techniques from you. Otherwise, when I become an expert in the future, I won't be like you. Around the small bench, laughter came from all directions. Even the older teenagers like Zhong Jiazhen were envious of the child's audacity to talk to Chen Pinggan like that. Chen Pinggan continued to tell the story of ghosts and monsters, as well as cultivators who subdued demons. Then he stood up and put the bamboo stick on the small bench. The children also made way for him. They watched the man in green slowly do the 6-step dance. Chen Pinggan stood still and smiled. Have you learned it? Guo Zhujiu watched without blinking. A top-notch fist technique with the demeanor of a master. The child holding the money jar said in a daze, that's it. Chen Pinggan nodded. Otherwise. The child gently put down the clay pot, stood up, and unleashed a series of ferocious moves. After he retracted his fist while panting, the child said angrily, this is the fist technique you used to defeat so many little sword immortals, Chen Pinggan. Who are you fooling? You walk step by step, and you're so slow that I'm worried for you. Chen Pinggan pointed at the word on the ground and smiled. Have you forgotten? Chen Pinggan walked through the 6 steps again, still slow and leisurely throwing out punches. As he walked, he said, all fist techniques and martial arts are obtained from stability. One day, when I've mastered the fist technique, I'll throw this punch again. After the last punch, Chen Pinggan stopped, leaned up, and punched towards the sky. The children all opened their eyes wide and looked at the sky. Chen Pinggan had already quietly pulled back his fist, picked up the bamboo stick and the bench, and was ready to go home. The child asked in a daze, when you threw this punch, there was no thunder. The others also nodded, feeling that it wasn't fun at all. Chen Pinggan smiled. I didn't really throw a punch. The atmosphere became a bit awkward. Guo Zhujiu's qi sank into her dantian, and she shouted, Boom! Chen Pingan put his hand to his forehead. It was a bit embarrassing, but he couldn't hurt the little girl's heart, so he forced a smile and gave the little girl a thumbs up. The rest of the children also looked at each other. Let's go, it's boring, let's wait for the next story. Chen Pingan called Zhong Jiazhen. The boy was confused, and still came to Chen Pingan's side, anxious. For the boy, this man named Chen Pingan was a celestial. Chen Pingan walked slowly, twisted his wrist, secretly took out a bamboo leaf, and gave it to Zhong Jiazhen. He said softly, "This is for you, you can wear it, just like the stance, it's useless. I'm not trying to test you, it's the truth, but as long as you're willing to learn, walk a few more times every day, and this little bamboo leaf can help you resist the cold. It's going to snow soon, it's a cold season, it's easier to work as a worker, it's still okay." Zhong Jiazhen clenched the bamboo leaf, and was silent for a moment. Am I really not suitable to practice martial arts and swordsmanship? Chen Pingan nodded, yes. The boy's eyes reddened, and he lowered his head, not saying a word. Chen Pingan looked forward. At such a young age, you can take responsibility for yourself, it's a very impressive thing. Zhong Jiazhen, don't underestimate yourself. The boy raised his head. Chen Pingan smiled. The name Jiazhen, is it a name you came up with after reading so many inscriptions? The boy nodded. My parents left early, and my grandfather can't read, so for the past few years, he only has a nickname. Chen Pingan turned his head and said, Jiazhen is for beauty, chastity is for firmness, it's a very good name. Life in the Great Wall of Sword Qi isn't good, this is something you can't do anything about, you can only accept your fate, but how you want to live is up to you. Whether it will be better in the future, it's hard to say, it might be more difficult. Maybe in the future, when you become skilled in your craft, you will earn more money, and become a craftsman respected by the neighbors. At this point, Chen Pingan turned his head and smiled, but at the very least, when I tell stories to others in the future, I might mention that in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, there was a craftsman named Zhong Jiazhen in the Consonance Alley. Other than craftsmanship, he might not be good at anything else, but since he was young, he liked to read inscriptions. After Zhong Jiazhen left, from the beginning to the end, Guozhujiu didn't say anything, she just raised her head and looked at the man who would be her master in 1.5 years. In an instant, Guozhujiu's eyes widened, filled with anticipation. Chen Pingan counted with his fingers, and then said, the matter of accepting a disciple, it will still take 1.5 years. Guozhujiu let out a heavy sigh. Chen Pingan continued to walk forward. The wine shop was bustling with activity, and money flowed like water into my pockets. From afar, it looked very festive. Chen Pingan, who was in a good mood, casually asked, have you ever heard of a saying? It is said that only 100 beasts under the heavens can produce a poet whose works will be passed down through the ages. Guozhujiu shook her head. The future master is knowledgeable, but the future disciple is not. I have never heard of it. Chen Pingan was curious. The feng shui of Luo Po Mountain had already spread to the Great Wall of Sword Qi? That didn't make sense. The main culprit, the first disciple of the mountain, Zhu Lian, and the others, were very far away. Guozhujiu curiously asked, is there more to it? Chen Pingan nodded. A popular essay for thousands of years is nothing. All of you, from generation to generation, have been here for tens of thousands of years. This is enough to shame all the poems in the world. Guozhujiu asked, Master, do you need me to help you shout these words in the streets and alleys? Disciple will shout while practicing stances, it won't be tiring. Chen Pingan helplessly said, don't. Guozhujiu was secretly happy. Her words just now were hiding something. Calling herself a disciple and calling him master, she had profited greatly today. They arrived at the wine shop. Ning Yaro looked at Guozhujiu, who was preparing to leave. The little girl ran up to Ning Yaro, smiling, Sister Ning, why do you look so good today? Ning Yaro looked at Chen Pingan. Chen Pingan bitterly smiled, I don't teach these things. Guozhujiu saw that Sister Ning wasn't beating her, so she stopped and went home. When she was young, she felt that there were many things to worry about. When she grew up, she would forget what those worries were. Ning Yaro and Chen Pingan returned to the Ning mansion together. Ning Yaro asked, Are you really going to accept a disciple? Chen Pinggan nodded. For now, it's an anonymous one. The Guo family treats people kindly. It's rare that I can do something for the Ning mansion. Wei Jin, who was drinking at the wine shop, seemed to have remembered something. He turned to look at Chen Pinggan's back and laughed in his mind. I was so focused on drinking that I forgot to tell you. A long time ago, seniors were asked me to pass on a message to you, asking when you're going to practice the sword. Chen Pinggan turned to Wei Zhong and shouted, Head shopkeeper, in the future, when Great Sword Immortal Wei drinks here, you'll get a 10% discount. Wei Jin took out a piece of grain rain money and placed it on the table. No problem. Ning Yarrow asked, What's wrong? Chen Pinggan bitterly smiled, I have to go to the Great Wall of Sword Qi immediately. Tell Grandma Bai to prepare the medicine jar. If it's too late and you don't see me, go and carry me back. At the Great Wall of Sword Qi, facing the south, he sat cross-legged and closed his eyes to rest. There were many things that he couldn't understand. Even if he could understand some things, he wasn't willing to accept them. So in the end, he chose to stay away from the quarrels of the human world and flew towards the sea on his sword. This wasn't a romantic thing for a sword immortal. In fact, it wasn't pleasant at all. But at the moment, there was one more thing that he couldn't understand. Teacher wasn't by his side, but that junior brother dared to be so bold. 584. Chen Pinggan put away the talisman boat and landed on the city wall. Left and right intentionally retracted his sword aura. Therefore, the two of them were less than 10 steps apart. Left and right looked at the vast world outside the city wall and asked a question. Have you thought about some things that are bound to happen? North of the Great Wall of Sword Qi, the city with a bottomless foundation and secrets gave people a feeling of strict rules, but also seemed to have no rules at all. There was a sword immortal who killed countless enemies in the war. In between the wars, he lived a muddle-headed life as an emperor of the human world. There was a special cross-continent ferry that sold female Qi cultivators from the continent for this sword immortal. Those who caught his eye would be taken in as maids in the magnificent palace. Those who did not catch his eye would be beheaded with a flying sword and still be paid. There were sword immortals who liked to guard a few small vegetable gardens and an orchard. Year after year, they lived the life of a farmer. There were sword immortals who liked to hang out in the streets and use camouflage techniques to hang out with the rascals in the alleys all year round. There were disciples of big clans who yearned to leave the Great Wall of Sword Qi and go to the academy to study. There were also rich young masters who were unruly and temperamental. They spent a lot of money and liked to torture and kill their servants. The scholarly sage who was previously in charge of the Great Wall of Sword Qi felt injustice because of this. However, the eldest sword immortal, Chen Qingju, only said to fight first. That sage fought 3 battles in a row. He won 2 and lost 1. He left the Great Wall of Sword Qi and returned to the world. He won 2 local sword immortals and lost to the hidden official. Right and wrong in this world were not as simple as imagined. Left and right, even if they only heard about it after the event, they knew that it was full of murderous intent. The scariest thing in the world was that there were no standpoints and right and wrong were mixed up. The scariest thing was that there were only standpoints and black and white. Left and right were most afraid of smart people who believed that there were only standpoints and no reason in the world. Chen Pinggan asked, Is it near or far? Left and right put away their scattered thoughts and said, It's about the things in front of them and the things around them. Chen Pinggan nodded and said, Senior Marshal Brother has reminded me before, and I am also clear about the general atmosphere in the city. People speak and act without restraint, so there will soon be undercurrents surging. After a while, those gossips will gradually become clear. The reason is that I have won 4 matches in a row. The reason is that I am in the Ning mansion. The reason is that I am Mr.'s disciple and Senior Marshal Brother's junior marshal brother. The reason why it hasn't happened yet is because Elder Sword Immortal Dong has brought people to the Stacked Peak store for drinks. That's why many people have no choice but to shut their mouths. Zhuozhua said, Just talk about the consequences. Chen Pinggan said, Many people are afraid that the Ning mansion's matter will bring up old scores, so they don't want the Ning mansion and the Yarrow family to be harmonious again. With me around, the pure relationships between Ning Yao, Chen Sanqiu, Dong Huafu, and Yang Zhuo would become muddy in the eyes of some people. In the past, they might not have cared, but now they wouldn't be too willing. The Guo family might be added to the mix as well, so the situation would be very complicated. It's very likely that Guo Zhujiu will be grounded at home in the near future. This is because very soon, unpleasant words will spread to the Guo family. For example, they will say that the Guo family's ability to treat others coldly is not small. They might even say that the Guo family's sword immortal is scheming to get a young lady to build relationships. No matter what is said, there will only be one outcome. The Guo family can only temporarily distance themselves from the Ning mansion. After all, the Guo family isn't just a single person under sword immortal Guo. There are more than 100 people in the Guo family, and all of them have to establish themselves in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. These were all fine. What Chen Pinggan was afraid of were even more disgusting and despicable methods. For example, the children in the shabby alley near the wine shop had suddenly died. However, Chen Pinggan did not say anything at that moment. Zhuozhuo said, "Unless Chen Qingdu comes forward to propose marriage." Chen Pinggan nodded. Zhuozhuo asked, "Why aren't you in a hurry?" Chen Pinggan said, "I don't dare and I don't want to rush Boss Sword Immortal. Besides, I have a plan to deal with it sooner or later." Zhuozhuo continued asking, "What do you mean?" Chen Pinggan answered, "It's just words. I don't care, and I can't care. If I can help, I have both my fist and my sword. If it's not enough, I can borrow it from you." Zhuozhuo nodded and smiled. "That's right. I can't be bothered to ask about the specific plan. Think about it carefully. Accidents in the Great Wall of Sword Qi are often abnormally simple and direct. Instead, they can be extraordinarily unexpected. Do you know how many sword cultivators there are at the Great Wall of Sword Qi training in the wilderness?" Chen Pinggan shook his head and said, "This is top secret." "I don't know." Zhuozhuo smiled and asked, "Then what do you know?" Chen Pinggan said, "I only know the names of the 5 realms sword immortals and earth immortals on the Great Wall of Sword Aura, their general background, as well as the important figures of the Dong, Chen, and Qi clans, 121 people. Although it doesn't mean much, it's better than nothing." Zhuozhuo was puzzled. "You have so much free time." Chen Pinggan smiled and said, "It's a habit. Besides, I'm more familiar with this matter. It definitely won't affect my training and cultivation." "Don't worry, senior brother." Zhuozhuo asked, "Do you prefer the Shong clan and the martial arts school?" Chen Pinggan was stunned and shook his head. "I've never come into contact with the doctrines and scriptures of these 2 schools." Zhuozhuo glanced at Chen Pinggan and smiled. "Although these 2 schools of knowledge are at the bottom of the 3 religions and 9 schools and have been rejected and despised by the Confucians for a long time, I feel that it's not a problem for you to read their books appropriately. However, don't be too stubborn. There are many studies in the world that are amazing at first glance, but often superficial. At first glance, it's vast and boundless, but often overgrown. After reading it, you'll feel that it's just so. However, you still have to read it. I'm just afraid that you won't be able to get out of it after reading it. If you can understand a fundamental principle from a book of the 100 schools of thought, it's already a great harvest." Chen Pinggan cupped his fists and bowed. "I've learned something." Zhuozhuo stood up. "Unless it's to see the fighting in the northern cities, sword immortals won't use the mountain-controlling divine power to investigate the movements in the cities. This is an unwritten rule. There are some things that you need to resolve yourself and bear the consequences. However, there is one thing that I can help you take a few more glances at." "Which one do you think it is? Which one do you hope it is the most?" Chen Pinggan said without hesitation, "I hope that senior apprentice brother can help take care of the children in the shabby alleys near the wine shop so that they don't die because of me." Zhuozhuo didn't comment and asked another question. "Isn't this the most trivial thing? Is it worth me taking a few more glances?" Chen Pinggan smiled. "In the eyes of a scholar, there are no trivial things in the world." Zhuozhuo sighed with emotion. "Chen Pinggan, if you had become Mister's disciple earlier, it would have been great. Mr. wouldn't have been troubled for 100 years. You can take care of Mr.'s money in my place. You can chat with Mr. a lot. I'm not good at either. Chen Pinggan absolutely wouldn't respond to such a topic. Zwazwaz suddenly said, when Mr. became a saint, there were still people who called him an old fox. They said that Mr. was like a cultivator who had cultivated into a spirit and that his Tao was soaked in ink. When Mr. heard about it, he said 2 words, wonderful. Chen Pinggan said, after the Gao Emperor signed the Mountain Alliance with the Dali dynasty, the people of the Great Sui Kingdom were furious. Among them, there were people who called senior apprentice brother Mao a literary monster. Now it seems that senior apprentice brother Mao must have been happy at that time. Zwazwa stopped talking. Chen Pinggan also fell silent. The matter of sword practice should be delayed as much as possible. Anyway, he would definitely eat too much. Chen Pinggan suddenly wanted to say something but stopped. He looked around. Zwazwa nodded, indicating that Chen Pinggan could speak freely. Chen Pinggan said in his mind, senior apprentice brother, could there be sword immortals in the city secretly spying on Ning Mansion? Zwazwa thought about it. Even if there is, it won't last long. It can only be done occasionally. After all, Nalen Yeshing is not a decoration. Nalen Yeshing is an expert in assassination. He is also one of the most underestimated sword cultivators in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. He can assassinate others, so naturally he is good at concealment and investigation. Chen Pinggan looked serious and said, Alliance imparted the 18-stop sword Qi to me. I not only taught it to my disciple Pei Qian, I also taught it to an ordinary youth from the Aquarius continent. His name is Zhao Gaoshu. His character is very good, there is no problem. But the youth has not gone to Luo Po Mountain yet. I am afraid. What if? Zwazwa said, I will take care of this. Chen Pinggan felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted off his shoulders. With senior apprentice brother, it was indeed different. Then Zwazwa said, after talking so much, it is not a reason for you to delay sword practice. Chen Pinggan was speechless. That bastard Wei Jin tricked him, it was not a reason. With senior apprentice brother's temper, he would not think that it was a reason. If he really said it, the matter of sword practice would only be worse. If he was not a literary saint, he would not be able to understand the reason. Zwazwa returned to the city wall and sat down, continuing to nurture his sword concept. Chen Pinggan probed, how do I train? Zwazwa sneered, why, a martial artist in the Golden Body realm is invincible, do you still need me to use my sword? Chen Pinggan understood, and asked carefully, then I will use my fist. Zwazwa turned a deaf ear to him. Chen Pinggan was hesitant, the first fist, should he use the deity drum beating style? But Zwazwa said slowly, within 100 fists, adding the flying sword, if you can get within 30 steps of me, I will call you senior apprentice brother. He no longer restrained the sword Qi around his body, as though a small world had suddenly expanded. Chen Pinggan instantly retreated 20 steps. No more, no less, the distance between the two was 30 steps. The sword Qi pounced on him, as though countless flying swords were flying in front of him, if not for Chen Pinggan's fist aura flowing naturally, resisting the sword Qi that leaked out from the sword Qi. Chen Pinggan would have been covered in injuries, and had to retreat a few more steps. He retreated, but the fist aura surged. Zwazwa smiled, after 100 fists, if I feel that your fists are too polite, then you can prepare to complain to Mr. next time. Chen Pinggan forced a smile, senior apprentice brother, I am not that kind of person. Zwazwa said, after sword practice, you are too. Wei Jin who drank and did not drink were 2 Wei Jins, Wei Jin who drank and drank were 2 Wei Jins. He was the first young sword immortal to appear in the Aquarius continent's 1,000 years of history. He was actually very popular in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, especially among the ladies. The ladies did not necessarily admire Wei Jin, after all, there were many sword immortals in their hometown. Although Wei Jin was extremely young, and it was said that he was already a sword immortal in the upper 5 realms at the age of 40, it was not considered rare in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. In terms of the killing power of the flying sword, Wei Jin was not outstanding, at least he was still so, after all, he was still in the unpolished Jade realm. In terms of appearance, the men of the Qi family were famous for being handsome, and Wei Jin was not the most outstanding. Chen Sancho's family was not bad either. However, the older women all liked Wei Jin. They said that when they saw Wei Jin drinking, their hearts ached for him. When Wei Jin did not drink, he seemed to be forever sad, but after drinking a few cups, he would have a gentle smile, and after drinking, he would be in high spirits. Hence, to the ladies who saw Wei Jin drinking, this young sword immortal from the Snow Wind Temple's divine immortal platform was truly a divine immortal that walked out of the snow. They really did not know what kind of woman could make Wei Jin unable to let go of her. After the Heartless Alliance left, the infatuated Wei Jin came. The heavens were still kind. As for the ladies, they should just forget about it. Their eyes hurt just by looking at him a few more times, so why bother? Besides, they did not like to wander around the city. If they were too far away, they would not be able to see him clearly. In the end, they did not miss Wei Jin, who often drank, right? Every time Wei Jin got drunk, the smell of alcohol would not dissipate. He would remain drunk and stagger back to the city on his sword. That was truly heartbreaking. Today, Wei Jin drank a little too much at the Stacked Cliff wine shop, and more than 10 people were squeezed into a table. Wei Jin was a good drinker, and he never put on airs. If there were no seats, it was fine for 2 or 3 people to squeeze into a bench. This was probably the influence of people who were used to the Jianghu at the foot of the mountain. In this aspect, local sword immortals and sword immortals from other continents did not have the natural Jianghu aura that Wei Jin had. When Wei Jin first met Chen Pinggan, he was still a young man, and Wei Jin could not say whether he liked him or not. Now, he appreciated him a little more. But Wei Jin could not help but like He Xiaoyong. The further away he was, the more he drank. Wei Jin hid at the foot of the mountain and hid in the Jianghu, but he still could not forget her. First, one was in the Wind Snow Temple, the other was in the Divine Grandeur sect. Then, one was in the Aquarius continent, the other was in the North continent. In the end, one of them was in the Wildlands, and the other was in the Righteous Age. In the end, she was still in Wei Jin's wine cup. No matter how much wine he drank, it was useless. After drinking a cup and filling the next cup, she would be there. Wei Jin raised his wine cup and asked loudly, "Why is it difficult for people who do not like to drink wine to get drunk?" Wei Jin drank it in one gulp. The world's first wine drinker, how hateful, how hateful. Stacked Cliff was used to it. Sword immortal Wei Jin often drank like this, but he would talk to himself more often, and would not really go crazy. Otherwise, how could a small wine shop withstand the madness of a sword immortal? At that moment, no one shouted for more wine, and Stacked Cliff took a break from the busy shop. He sat by the door and sighed softly. Here it comes again. Wei Jin stood where he was, pouring wine without stopping. He looked around and began to toast one by one, naming names and toasting. Why did he toast? Naturally, it was to talk about the battle in the south of the city. He talked about which sword move was the most brilliant, and occasionally asked the other party to punish themselves with a cup. He also talked about the battle. Some demons that deserved to be killed were only half dead, which was inexcusable. Wei Jin's figure suddenly disappeared, and he said angrily, "Despicable." In a small alley, Guozhujiu walked leisurely. A sallow and emaciated youth had run into the alley earlier. His footsteps were hurried, as if he was trying to hide. He kept looking back, but when he saw Guozhujiu, he hesitated and slowed down. He even subconsciously moved closer to the wall. At the Great Wall of Sword Qi, rich people, as long as they did not die, would become richer and richer, and then they would have a family. With a sword immortal, the family would become a wealthy family. The poor people in the city, just by looking at their clothes, could tell if they were from a wealthy family. That youth obviously thought that Guozhujiu was from a wealthy family, and he was not wrong. In the Great Wall of Sword Qi, the Guo family was indeed a first-tier family, apart from the top families. Offending a member of a wealthy family would not end well. The other party did not even have to bring out their background. If the other party was a sword cultivator, they could just do it themselves. Guozhujiu slowed down and jumped twice. She saw that behind the youth, There were 4 people of the same age who ran into the alley, armed with clubs. They were noisy. The youth probably saw that Guozhujiu did not look like a sword cultivator, and was probably from a rich family on the streets. He had nothing better to do, so he came here for a stroll. The youth was a little anxious, and waved at Guozhujiu, indicating for her to leave the alley quickly. Guozhujiu scratched her head, stopped, turned around, and ran. She was good at running, and she liked it. It was a pity that the youth was delayed by Guozhujiu, and he was quickly caught up by the people of the same age who were holding the clubs. They hit the skinny youth's head with the clubs without any strength. The youth had just dodged it, but another club came down on him. He could only use his hands to protect his head, dodging and retreating. A club hit his arm, and the youth's face turned pale from the pain. He was kicked in the chest by a tall youth. The skinny and sallow youth took a few steps back, and blood seeped out from the corner of his mouth. He held onto the wall with one hand, tilted his head, and dodged the club. He turned around and ran. Guozhujiu was at the corner of the alley, and she poked her head out. She felt that she should be chivalrous, or else it would look like someone was going to die. Usually, no one in the Great Wall of Sword Chi would care about fights, even if they were crippled. However, it was rare for someone to die. Guozhujiu heard from the elders in her family that the fiercest fighters were not sword immortals, but hot-blooded youths from the streets. This was one of them. This would not do. She, Guozhujiu, had learned martial arts, and was a member of the pugilistic world. Guozhujiu walked into the alley again. The skinny youth received another flying kick, and Guozhujiu reached out to press down on his shoulder. The youth's eyes were indifferent, and he instantly twisted his body. At the same time, he flicked his wrist, and a short knife slid out from his sleeve. He stabbed out with a backhand. Guozhujiu gently raised her elbow, and directly broke the arm that held the knife. The youth's other hand clenched into a fist, and he instantly punched out. His fist trembled, and his momentum was like thunder. The people of the same age who had beaten up the youth like a drowning dog were all scared out of their wits, and they leaned against the wall. Guozhujiu was no different from the assassin. She had the same indifferent expression, and similarly punched out. Fist against fist, the assassin's entire hand was shattered, and the two of them slumped to the ground. Guozhujiu slightly leaned to the side, and she pressed her shoulder against the youth's chest. The assassin died on the spot, and he was sent flying backward. However, a firefly flashed past the assassin's ear, and it rapidly approached. It was a sword cultivator's intrinsic flying sword, and it stabbed towards Guozhujiu's glabella. Guozhujiu slightly turned her head, and there was a deep blood groove on her forehead. On the other hand, the head of the tall youth who had used the flying sword was pierced through, and a drop of blood gradually condensed on his forehead. The body leaning against the wall slowly slid to the ground. Guozhujiu frowned and stretched out her hand to wipe her forehead. Wei Yijin, who was standing at the entrance of the alley, breathed a sigh of relief and quietly put away his intrinsic flying sword. The sword immortal of the Wind Snow Temple didn't know whether to laugh or cry. It turned out that his action was superfluous. Not only could the little girl deal with this sudden assassination, but she could also deal with the sudden assassination. At the other end of the alley, a stooped old man with a smile appeared. Wei Yijin nodded to greet him, and the old man also nodded back with a smile. Wei Yijin returned to the wine shop and continued to drink. The old man stepped out, came to Guozhujiu's side, and said with a smile, "LV Duan, good job." It was the old servant of the Ning mansion, Nalan Yeshing. The future son-in-law had told him that as long as Guozhujiu saw him, Chen Pingan, or walked into the Ning mansion, he needed to trouble Grandpa Nalan to help take care of the little girl until the moment Guozhujiu stepped into the Guo family's gate. Guozhujiu said proudly, "That's right, I can't beat Sister Ning and Sister Dong, but I can beat a few little thieves, right?" The little girl took a few steps forward, looked at the thin youth who died with his eyes open and still looked calm before death, and complained, "Don't you know that I have just practiced a peerless fist technique?" "Huh." Nalan Yeshing stretched out his finger and knocked on his forehead. He had a headache. Such an elaborate ambush and assassination aimed at the disciples of the big families, there was no need to take any chances. Don't think about following the vine to find the melon, It was impossible. That year at the Mirage Pavilion, there was a huge disturbance. The young lady almost hurt her great Tao foundation. That old woman, by Lian Shuang, also dropped her cultivation level. Even the sword immortal, who didn't care about anything on the city wall, was infuriated. It was rare for him to give an order personally. He directly called the Chen clan master over. With just one sword strike, the injured Chen clan master hurriedly returned to the city. He made a big fuss. The entire city was under martial law. Every household was searched. That Mirage Pavilion was turned upside down. In the end, the matter was still left unsettled. It wasn't that someone was slacking or trying to stop them. As for the other youths from the streets who were at a loss and in fear, their identities and backgrounds would be investigated. It was nothing more than a formality and an explanation to the Guo family. Of course, the Guo family would also mobilize a large number of people and use their methods and channels to dig 3 feet into the ground. After that, the relationship between the Ning family and the Guo family would be a little troublesome. Logically speaking, Lu Duan could jump around in the Great Wall of Sword Qi. The reason was very simple. She was the disciple of the hidden official. Therefore, the Guo family didn't deliberately arrange a retainer for her all these years because it was unnecessary. Therefore, the size of the ripples in this disturbance and the discretion of the other party were very tricky. It seemed that they didn't use the real key chess piece to kill Lu Duan. Guo Zhujiu frowned and said sickly, "It's over. I can't go out in the near future." Guo Zhujiu's eyes lit up. She turned to look at Naylan Yeshing. "Grandpa Naylan, why don't we destroy the evidence and pretend that this matter didn't happen?" Naylan Yeshing laughed. "You think too much. How can you hide the injury on your forehead? Did you hit it while walking again? Besides, it's such a big matter. You should tell Sword Immortal Guo. I've already sent a flying sword message to your family. So, just wait to be scolded." Guo Zhujiu sighed. "Grandpa Naylan, you must tell my master that I can't learn martial arts from him recently." Naylan Yeshing asked with a smile, "When did my son-in-law recognize you as his disciple?" Guo Zhujiu grinned and said, "It's just a matter of my master's calculation." Naylan Yeshing pointed at the little girl's forehead. Guo Zhujiu sneered, "Nothing." Then the little girl shivered and said with a sad face, "Ouch, it hurts." A slender middle-aged sword immortal appeared in the alley in the blink of an eye and stood beside Guo Zhujiu. He bent down and lowered his head. He stretched out his finger to press her head and shook it gently. After confirming his daughter's injury, he breathed a sigh of relief. There was still some sword qi left, but it was not a big problem. He straightened his back and said with a smile, "Are you still going crazy?" Guo Zhujiu stretched out a palm. Sword Immortal Guo Jiao said with a smile, 5 years of confinement. Guo Zhujiu said timidly, 10 hours. Forget it, 5 days will do. Guo Jiao stopped smiling. Guo Zhujiu saw that the situation was not good and quickly withdrew 4 fingers, leaving only 1 thumb. 1 year. Guo Jiao glanced at his daughter's wound and said helplessly, "Hurry up and go home with me. Your mother is worried to death. 1 year or a few years. It doesn't matter if you tell me. Go to her place and make a scene." In the end, Guo Jiao and Naylan Yeshing looked at each other. There was no need to say anything. Then the consecrators of the Guo family and the sword cultivators who specialized in dealing with such affairs arrived one after another. Everything was done in an orderly manner. Naylan Yeshing did not return to the Ning mansion directly. Instead, he went to the Great Wall of Sword Qi first. When he went to the Ning mansion, Bai Lianshuang, the old woman, was not good at dealing with these things. She could only be anxious. It was definitely useful to discuss this matter with Miss. These years, Miss had always made the decisions of Ning mansion. But now that Ning mansion had Chen Pinggan, Naylan Yeshing did not want Miss to be too distracted by these dirty things. But Miss was the one who was least afraid of trouble and liked to think too much. What's more, Miss would definitely listen to Mr. Naylan's decision. Hiding his aura all the way, he quietly went to the top of the wall. Who practiced sword and fist like this? Chen Pinggan tossed and turned, using the deity drumming style with his punches. At the same time, he controlled 2 real and 2 imitations, a total of 4 flying swords. He tried his best to find a gap in the sword chi, as if he only needed to take one step forward. He needed to use the spirit pill of Ning Mansion again. Fortunately, Bai Lianshuang did not blame him this time. The sword chi condensed within 30 steps around him. But occasionally, a trace of sword chi would rush out, hovering at Chen Ping'an's fatal acupuncture point for a moment, and then disappear in a flash. Nalin Yeshing couldn't help but sigh. He is also a human. How can he have so much sword chi? Moreover, he is about to temper the sword chi into sword intent. Ignoring the old man, he gathered the sword chi within 10 steps and said to Chen Ping'an, "That's it for today. Your punches are okay, but your flying swords are rigid and slow. Today is just to let you get used to it a little. The next time you practice sword, it will officially start. Also, you have died 96 times today. Try to die less next time. Is it so difficult to be a senior martial brother that you can easily get?" Chen Ping'an nodded and said nothing. "You have the nerve to ask me if it is difficult. Senior martial brother, don't you know whether the sword chi is heavy or not?" Besides, at this moment, Chen Ping'an seemed to be safe and sound except for his fists and arms. But in fact, that was not the case at all. Every time the sword chi hovered around him, it seemed that it did not touch Chen Ping'an's acupuncture points, but in fact, the sword intent had already penetrated into his bone marrow and overturned the sea in his chi palace. At this moment, Chen Ping'an could speak without trembling, which meant that he could withstand the pain. Chen Ping'an took a few steps forward and came to Nalin Yeshing's side. He asked softly, "Is Guozhuzhou injured?" Nalin Yeshing said, "I've been keeping an eye on her and deliberately didn't make a move. The little girl solved the trouble herself. Guozhuzhou came in person and didn't say anything. After all, he is Guozhuzhou. It's just that the trouble later." Chen Ping'an put 2 fingers together and gently cut down like a sword cutting a long line. He shook his head and said, "It's not a trouble anymore. It's actually a good thing for Ning Mansion and Guo family. I will definitely accept Guozhuzhou as my disciple." Chen Ping'an drove the talisman boat and returned to the city with Nalin Yeshing. Chen Ping'an asked curiously, "Grandpa Nalin, can you get close to my senior martial brother?" "Of course." Nalin Yeshing smiled and said, "Then I died." You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.